Welcome to the audiobook presentation of Resonance and Reclamation, the definitive Taylor Swift biography. From the cold, sharp air of a December morning in Berks County, Pennsylvania, to the record-breaking spectacle of the global stage, this is the story of a girl who grew up among the slow-growing evergreens of a Christmas tree farm and learned early that the best things take time to become what they are meant to be. It is an exploration of a career built with meticulous intention, from a 14-year-old signing a history-making publishing deal on Music Row to a 36-year-old at the height of her powers, reclaiming her narrative and her art one note at a time. Across 10 chapters, we trace the evolution of an artist who moved from the fairy tales of youth to the introspective philosophy of midnights and the raw, unshielded truths of the tortured poets department. This is the journey of a person who spent her life paying attention to what it feels like to be alive and found a way to share those observations with the world. The song goes on, and it begins here. Resonance and Reclamation, the definitive Taylor Swift biography. Chapter 1, Roots of the Willow, the Pennsylvania Prelude, 1989 to 2003. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a December morning in 1989. The air is cold and sharp in Berks County, Pennsylvania, carrying with it the particular stillness that only arrives in the days just before winter truly settles in. The trees are bare. The sky is the color of old pewter. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of Reading Hospital, a girl is born. Her name is Taylor Allison Swift. It is the 13th day of December, and though no one in that hospital room could have known it then, the world has just been introduced to someone who will, in the years to come, reshape popular music with a precision and a persistence that few artists in any generation have ever managed. But on this morning, she is simply a baby. Pink-cheeked and new, wrapped in the ordinary warmth of a family that loves her already, completely and without condition. Her parents, Scott and Andrea Swift, are not musicians. They are not dreamers in the conventional sense. Scott works in finance, steady and methodical, a man who understands the architecture of systems and institutions. Andrea, before motherhood, had built a career in marketing. Together, they are a couple shaped by the belief that the world rewards those who prepare for it, those who learn its language, understand its mechanisms, and move through it with intention. And so, even before their daughter can speak, they make a quiet, deliberate decision about her name. Taylor. A name that belongs to no single gender, that carries no ceiling, that will not announce anything about her before she has the chance to announce herself. It is, in its way, a small act of professional foresight, the kind of thinking that belongs more to a boardroom than a nursery. But it is also, whether they knew it or not, the first decision in a long series of decisions that will help build one of the most carefully constructed careers in the history of American entertainment. For now, though, she is simply Taylor. A child in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. Wyomissing is the kind of place that exists quietly and confidently in its own identity. It sits just west of Reading, a borough of wide tree-lined streets and well-kept homes where the seasons announce themselves with theatrical clarity. Autumn arrives in blazing color. Winter coats everything in white. Spring returns softly, tentatively, and summer spreads itself across the landscape with an almost lavish generosity. And at the edge of this world, the Swift family tends a Christmas tree farm. This is not a metaphor, though it will become one. Years later, Taylor herself will reach back into this early chapter of her life and find in it images and feelings that resonate far beyond nostalgia. But in the years of her actual childhood, the farm is simply the farm. A living, breathing place that demands attention. Rows upon rows of evergreens at various stages of their slow, patient growth. The smell of pine resin thick in the cold air. The particular satisfaction of a thing that takes years to become what it is meant to be. Taylor grows up here, among these trees. She learns early that some things cannot be rushed. Some things simply take the time they take. She is a curious child, bright and observant in the way that children sometimes are when they sense that the world contains more than what is immediately visible. She is drawn to stories, to the shape of them, the way a beginning leads inevitably toward a middle and then opens out into an ending that somehow feels both surprising and exactly right. She reads. She watches. She listens. And she performs. From an early age, there is something in Taylor Swift that reaches toward an audience. It is not arrogance, it is closer to a kind of longing, a desire to connect, to be heard, to translate something internal into something that can be shared. Her parents recognize it and nurture it carefully. They enroll her in children's theater, and she takes to it with the enthusiasm of someone who has finally found the room where she belongs. The stage, even a small one in a community theater in southeastern Pennsylvania, teaches her things that no classroom ever could. It teaches her how to hold a moment, how to breathe before speaking, how to move through space with awareness, how to make an audience feel that they are not watching something performed for them, but experiencing something alongside her. These are lessons she will carry with her for the rest of her life, onto club stages and television studios, and eventually, into arenas and stadiums so vast that the people in the back rows are little more than tiny points of light in the dark. But all of that is far away still. For now, she is a girl in Wyomissing, learning how to become. She is 11 years old when she takes the field at a Philadelphia 76ers basketball game. Think about what that means, to be 11, to walk out onto the floor of a professional sports arena, to stand before an audience of thousands who have come for something entirely different, and to open your mouth and sing the national anthem. The song itself is not easy. It is a test of range and breath control and nerve, a composition that has undone seasoned performers on the grandest of stages. But Taylor Swift stands there in that arena, and she sings it. Every note. Every phrase. Clean and clear, and with a composure that seems, in retrospect, almost impossible for a child of that age. The audience applauds, and she walks off the floor, and something has changed in her. Not dramatically, not in any way she could articulate at the time, but something has shifted. She has stood before a large, indifferent crowd, and made them pay attention. She has learned, in the most visceral and immediate way possible, that this is something she can do. She wants to do more of it. It is around this same time that Taylor Swift begins to direct her gaze southward, toward Nashville, Tennessee, toward the city that is, in the American cultural imagination, synonymous with country music, with stories told in 3 verses and a chorus, with the tradition of translating ordinary human experience into something that can be sung. Nashville is, to a certain kind of young dreamer, what Hollywood is to another, a place of transformation, a place where talent meets opportunity and something extraordinary becomes possible. Taylor Swift is not a passive dreamer. She is, even at 11, a young person who moves toward the things she wants with a directness that is striking. And so she and her mother, Andrea, travel to Nashville. They carry with them demo tapes, recordings that Taylor has made, the best she can manage at this stage of her development, and they move from label to label, from office to office, presenting their case to the gatekeepers of an industry that is, by nature, skeptical of the unproven. The answer from every label they approach is no. This is a moment worth sitting with. Because it would be easy, particularly when telling the story of someone who goes on to achieve what Taylor Swift achieves, to smooth over the rejections, to treat them as mere obstacles, speed bumps on an otherwise clear road to success. But they were not nothing. They were real. Each closed door was a real decision, made by real people who looked at this child and for whatever reason did not see what she saw in herself. And yet, Taylor Swift and her mother return home from Nashville without a record deal, and Taylor Swift does not stop. She pivots, and this is a word that is sometimes used too casually, but here it means something precise and important. She pivots toward songwriting. If the industry will not take her as she is, she will become something the industry cannot ignore. She will not wait to be discovered. She will build herself into someone worth discovering. She is 12 years old. It is at this age that she begins learning to play the guitar. Her teacher is not a famous musician or a conservatory-trained professional. He is a local figure, a man who plays guitar and, in the practical way of small-town life, also repairs computers. There is something almost poetically grounded about this detail. The person who helps Taylor Swift unlock her first chords is not someone who exists in the glittering world she is reaching toward, but someone who is fully entirely of the place she comes from. He teaches her. She practices. The calluses form on her fingertips, the way they do for every guitarist who is ever committed to the instrument, and with them comes something else, a growing sense of possibility. Because the guitar for Taylor Swift is not merely an instrument. It is a tool for composition. With it, she can translate the stories that have always lived inside her into something that has melody, structure, rhythm. Something that can be performed. Something that can be shared. She begins to write songs. Her influences at this stage are the women who have defined a certain strand of American popular music, women who tell stories, who refuse to be decorative, who insist on the fullness and complexity of their own emotional experience. Shania Twain looms large in her imagination. Twain, the Canadian-born country crossover phenomenon, had shown the world in the 1990s that country music could be bold and playful and unapologetically pop without losing any of its essential soul. The Dixie Chicks, too, that trio of Texas women whose harmonies were as tight as anything in American music and whose willingness to push against the boundaries of what country music was supposed to be, spoke directly to something in Taylor Swift's developing artistic identity. From these women, and from the broader tradition they represent, Taylor Swift absorbs a lesson that will define everything she creates. Specificity is everything. A song is not a general statement about love or loss or longing. A song is this love, this loss, this longing, located in a particular moment in a particular place, between particular people. The more specific the detail, the more universal the feeling. This is the paradox at the heart of storytelling, and Taylor Swift grasps it intuitively before she is old enough to articulate it. She begins writing songs with the kind of narrative precision that most songwriters take years, sometimes decades, to develop. She writes about what she knows, which is, at 12 and 13, the particular emotional landscape of adolescence, that terrain of intense friendships and first heartbreaks, and the bewildering business of figuring out who you are and who you are becoming. She writes about it with honesty and with detail, without sentimentality but not without feeling. And what emerges is something that sounds, even at this early stage, distinctly like her. The Swift family watches all of this, and they understand that something real is happening. Taylor's commitment is not the passing enthusiasm of a talented child who will find some other passion by the time she reaches high school. It is, unmistakably, a vocation. A calling. And Andrea and Scott Swift, those practical, forward-thinking people who named their daughter for the future they hoped she would have, begin to consider what it would take to give her the best possible chance. The answer, they eventually conclude, is geography. Nashville is where the country music industry lives. Nashville is where the publishers and producers and session musicians and label executives are. Nashville is where a young songwriter with a guitar and a notebook full of stories needs to be, if she is going to do more than dream. And so, when Taylor is 13 years old, the Swift family makes a decision that is, by any ordinary standard, an extraordinary one. They pack up their lives in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, the Christmas tree farm, the community theater, the familiar rhythms of a comfortable life in a comfortable place, and they move. They move to Hendersonville, Tennessee, a suburb north of Nashville, situated along the shores of Old Hickory Lake. It is a place of gentle hills and sprawling residential streets, close enough to the city to be useful, and quiet enough to feel like a home. Taylor will grow up here now. She will go to school here, make friends here, navigate the complicated social geography of American adolescence here. But everything is oriented, always, toward the city just down the road. Toward Nashville. Toward the thing she is building herself to become. She arrives in Hendersonville in 2003, 13 years old, carrying with her a guitar and a collection of songs, and the kind of focused, unshakable ambition that is rare in anyone, and almost unheard of in someone so young. She does not know, cannot know, what is coming. The successes and the setbacks, and the reinventions that lie ahead of her. The scale of what she will eventually achieve. The ways in which her name will become, over the next 2 decades, one of the most recognized and discussed names in popular culture. But she knows what she wants. She has always known what she wants. And she is moving, steadily and with intention, toward it. The Pennsylvania chapter is closing. The rows of Christmas trees stand quiet in the cold, patient as they have always been, growing in their slow and certain way. And somewhere in a car heading south on the long road to Tennessee, a 13-year-old girl with a notebook full of songs is watching the landscape change around her, already writing the next line. Chapter 2, Nashville's Youngest Prodigy, The Big Machine, 2004 to 2006. There is a specific kind of morning that belongs only to Nashville. The light arrives early and warm even in winter, falling in long golden angles across the low hills and the river and the neighborhoods that spread outward from the city's beating heart. Music Row wakes up slowly, coffee in hand, the business of song already beginning in studio control rooms and publishing offices before most of the city has finished its breakfast. It is a world that operates on its own internal clock, governed not by the rhythms of commerce or industry in the conventional sense, but by something older and stranger, the rhythm of stories waiting to be told. Into this world in 2004 walks Taylor Swift. She is 14 years old. She has been in Tennessee for a year now, long enough to have shed some of the disorientation of transplant life, long enough to have begun to understand the particular geography of the city she has come to conquer. Hendersonville sits at a comfortable remove from the center of things, a quiet suburb where she can be, for a few hours each day, simply a teenage girl, attending school, navigating friendships, doing the ordinary work of growing up. But the pull of Nashville is constant and strong, and she moves toward it whenever she can, guitar in hand, notebook in pocket, with the focused intensity of someone who has made an internal bargain with herself about what her life is going to be. The music publishing world is different from the record label world, though the two are deeply intertwined. A publishing deal is, at its core, a recognition that a writer's output has commercial value, that the songs they create are worth owning a piece of, worth developing, worth sending out into the world through the complex channels of licensing and placement and recording. It is, in many ways, the more fundamental transaction in the music business, because without the song, there is nothing. No record, no performance, no career. The song is the atom at the center of everything. Sony ATV Music Publishing understands this with the clarity of an organization that has been in the business of songs for a very long time. Its catalog is vast and storied, reaching back through decades of American popular music. It is not an organization that signs teenagers out of sentiment or novelty. When Sony ATV makes a deal, it is because someone within that organization has looked carefully at what a writer is producing and concluded, with professional confidence, that the investment is sound. In 2004, Sony ATV looks at Taylor Swift's work and makes exactly that calculation. She signs a songwriting deal with them, the youngest person in the company's history to do so. Read that again, slowly, and let it settle. Not the youngest in a given year. Not the youngest in a given decade. The youngest, in the entire history of a company whose history stretches back further than most people alive have been breathing. This is not a participation trophy. This is a professional institution, conservative by nature and cautious by experience, saying clearly and formally, this 14-year-old girl is writing things worth paying attention to. The significance of this moment extends far beyond its immediate professional implications. Because what Sony ATV is recognizing in Taylor Swift is not her voice, not her stage presence, not the charming novelty of a teenager who wants to be a country star. They are recognizing her as a writer. A craftsperson. Someone who constructs songs with intention and skill, who understands that a lyric is not merely a string of words, but a precise instrument for the delivery of feeling. This distinction, writer first, will prove in the years ahead to be one of the most important facts of her professional identity. Not immediately, and not in ways that the 14-year-old version of herself could fully anticipate. But later, when the music industry enters one of its periodic convulsions, and the question of who owns what becomes a matter of public debate and personal anguish, the fact that Taylor Swift's foundation was built on her own pen will matter enormously. She has never simply been the face attached to someone else's work. She has always been the source. For now, though, the publishing deal is both a validation and a structure. It gives her access to Music Row in a formal, professional capacity. It opens doors that would otherwise remain closed to a 14-year-old with ambition. And through those doors, she begins to meet the people who will help her develop the craft she already possesses into something sharper and more durable. Among them is Liz Rose. Liz Rose is, by any measure, one of the more gifted songwriters working on Music Row in the mid-2000s. She has a writer's sensibility that is at once economical and emotionally expansive, the ability to say a great deal with very few words, to find the phrase that opens a feeling rather than simply describing it. She is also, crucially, someone who understands how to work with other writers. How to listen. How to ask the right question at the right moment, and then step back and let the answer become a song. When she begins writing with Taylor Swift, something clicks. Their sessions follow a particular rhythm. Taylor arrives with the raw material, the emotional core of what she wants to say, often drawn from her own experience, from the daily texture of her teenage life in Hendersonville, from the intensity of feeling that belongs specifically to adolescence and that most adult songwriters have learned over time to dilute and soften. Liz Rose listens. She does not talk Taylor out of the specificity, does not sand down the edges into something more generically palatable. Instead, she helps shape what is already there, helps find the structure that best serves the feeling, the rhyme that lands like a small revelation rather than a forced convenience, the bridge that opens the song outward before bringing it home. What emerges from these sessions is writing that does not sound like it has been processed through the machinery of commercial consideration. It sounds, with remarkable consistency, like someone telling the truth. That is not an accident. It is the result of craft applied with great deliberateness to the work of preserving authenticity, which is, paradoxically, one of the most difficult technical challenges in popular songwriting. Taylor Swift is learning this at 14. She is learning it at the feet of someone who is very good at it. And she is absorbing the lessons with a completeness that speaks to the seriousness of her attention. The young demographic that her writing speaks to, teenagers broadly, but more specifically teenage girls, is one that the country music establishment of this era has not particularly prioritized. Country music in 2004 is many things, but it is not, in the main, oriented toward the inner lives of 14-year-old girls in suburban Tennessee. It is oriented toward adults, toward the accumulated weight of adult experience, marriages and divorces and working lives, and the long arc of lives already substantially lived. It is a music of looking back as much as looking forward. Taylor Swift is not looking back. She has almost nothing yet to look back on. She is looking directly at the present moment, at the friendships forming and fracturing, at the crushes and the heartbreaks and the particular social architecture of high school, at the experience of being young and feeling everything with a fullness that later life tends in most people to moderate. And she is writing about all of it with a precision and an honesty that the young listeners who will eventually find her music will recognize immediately as true. They will recognize it because it is theirs. It is their experience, articulated by someone living it alongside them. But that audience is still, in late 2004, waiting to be found. Taylor Swift is still building the thing they will eventually find. November arrives, as November does in Nashville, with the particular quality of a season settling in, the light shifting, the days shortening, the city pulling inward slightly, the way cities do when warmth becomes something to be sought rather than assumed. It is in this November in 2004 that Taylor Swift walks into the Bluebird Cafe. The Bluebird Cafe is, in the geography of Nashville music, a sacred space. Small and unassuming from the outside, tucked into a strip mall on Hillsborough Pike in the Green Hills neighborhood, the kind of location that would be unremarkable in any other context, it is on the inside one of the most storied listening rooms in American music. The format is intimate and demanding. The audience sits close. The performers sit in a circle in the middle of the room, facing each other, trading songs, explaining their origins, peeling back the construction of a piece of music to reveal the human experience underneath. There is nowhere to hide at the Bluebird. The songs stand alone, without the armor of production or spectacle. They are simply what they are. Taylor Swift is there to perform a showcase. She is 14 years old, and she is about to play for an audience that includes a man named Scott Borchetta. Borchetta is in the process of becoming something. He has spent years in the music industry in various capacities, working with labels, developing artists, learning the interior logic of a business that operates on instinct as much as on data. He has arrived at a point where he is ready to build something of his own. He is in the process of launching Big Machine Records, an independent label, a venture that requires not only capital and infrastructure but also artists, voices around which the new enterprise can be organized, faces that will define what Big Machine is and what it stands for. He is, in other words, looking for something specific. He may not be able to name it precisely before he sees it, but he will know it when he does. He sees it that November night at the Bluebird. Taylor Swift performs and Scott Borchetta watches. What he sees is not simply a talented teenager. What he sees, and this is in retrospect, the quality of vision that defines a certain kind of industry figure, the ones who build things that last, is an artist with a complete internal logic. A young woman who already understands, intuitively and deeply, what she is trying to do and why. Who writes from a place of genuine feeling, and shapes that feeling with genuine craft. Who performs not with the desperate eagerness of someone seeking approval, but with the focused presence of someone sharing something they believe in. He approaches her after the performance. They talk. The conversation that begins that evening at the Bluebird Cafe will, in the years ahead, produce some of the most successful records in the history of American country music. It will also eventually become far more complicated and far more painful than either of them can imagine on this November night. But that complexity is in the future. For now, there is simply the beginning of something. Taylor Swift becomes one of the first signings to Big Machine Records. She is still 14 years old. The years of 2005 and into 2006 are years of preparation, of writing and recording, of developing the specific musical identity that her debut will present to the world. She continues her work with Liz Rose and others, continues refining the craft, continues sharpening the instinct for detail that has always been her most distinctive quality as a writer. The songs accumulate. The album takes shape. And then in June of 2006, it begins. Her debut single arrives in the world, and its title, Tim McGraw, is from the very first moment, a demonstration of the kind of specificity that defines Taylor Swift's artistic approach. The song is named for a real person, a real country music star, and it uses his music as an emotional anchor point. In the song's narrative, a couple is at the end of something, a summer, a relationship, a chapter of youth that is closing, and one of them asks the other to think of her when they hear a Tim McGraw song. It is a small, precise human request. It asks nothing grand. It asks only for the specific and private continuation of a feeling. The song is filled with this kind of specificity. The little black dress. The details that locate the emotion in a real moment rather than a theoretical one. Everything in the lyric is chosen because it is true to the feeling, because it names something recognizable. Listeners hear it and know immediately that whoever wrote this song was not inventing an experience, but reporting one. It is a beautiful piece of work, and it announces to anyone paying close attention that something genuinely new has arrived in country music. The debut album follows in October. Self-titled Taylor Swift, produced by Nathan Chapman, a Nashville figure who understands how to frame a voice without overwhelming it, how to build a production that serves the song rather than competing with it. The record is a full introduction, a carefully assembled portrait of its creator as she exists in this moment of her life and career. She is 16 years old when it is released. The album finds its audience with a steadiness that speaks to something real beneath the music, not the manufactured excitement of a label-driven push, not the brief flare of novelty, but the quiet and durable loyalty of listeners who feel that a record understands them. Teenagers find it. They find it the way people find things that have been made specifically for them, with specific knowledge of who they are and what they feel. The country music establishment takes notice. By 2007, the Country Music Association has made its assessment. Taylor Swift receives the Horizon Award for Best New Artist, the industry's formal recognition that what is happening here is not a trend or an accident but the beginning of something significant. It is an award that has been given over the years to artists who go on to define eras and others who do not quite sustain the initial promise. The industry is watching to see which category Taylor Swift will occupy. She is watching too. She is still only 17, still attending school in Hendersonville, still navigating the strange double life of being a professional artist in a teenage body. But she is watching the world respond to what she has made, and she is already thinking about what comes next. Already writing it in all likelihood, new songs accumulating in notebooks the way they always have, with the regularity and the urgency of someone for whom the writing is not a career strategy, but a fundamental need. The Bluebird Cafe is just down the road. Music Row is just down the road. Nashville, which took her in and gave her the language to become what she already was, hums and breathes around her. She is just beginning. Chapter 3, Fairy Tales and First Grammys, The Fearless Era 2007 to 2009. There is a particular kind of momentum that builds in the music industry when something real is happening. Not the manufactured kind. Not the kind that press releases and radio promotion can sustain indefinitely on their own, but the organic word of mouth, one listener telling another kind that has always been the truest measure of an artist's connection to their audience. By 2007, that kind of momentum is gathering around Taylor Swift with a force and a speed that surprises almost everyone in Nashville. Almost everyone, that is, except perhaps the 17-year-old at the center of it, who has always seemed to possess, alongside her considerable gifts, an unusually clear-eyed understanding of what she is building and why it is working. The self-titled debut is still finding new ears. Radio is playing it. Fans are sharing it. The Horizon Award sits somewhere in the Swift family home in Hendersonville, a formal and glittering confirmation of what the sales numbers have already been saying for months. But Taylor Swift is not the kind of artist who pauses to admire what she has accomplished. She is, constitutionally and by habit, already looking forward, already sitting with a guitar in a room somewhere, turning a feeling into a melody, finding the exact word that makes a lyric lock into place. She is writing the next album. And the next album will be called Fearless. The title is not chosen casually. Nothing Taylor Swift does at this stage or at any stage of her career is chosen casually. Fearless is a word with weight. It names a quality that is aspirational rather than descriptive, that acknowledges the presence of fear while refusing to be governed by it. It is, in a certain light, a deeply honest title for a record made by someone who has moved across the country at 13, signed publishing deals at 14, released a debut album at 16, and is now at 18, preparing to make the move that will determine whether what she has built is a promising beginning or the foundation of something genuinely lasting. The pressure of the second album is, in the music industry, almost mythological in its proportions. It is the moment of true reckoning, the point at which the initial excitement has settled, and the question becomes not whether this artist can arrive, but whether they can remain. Many artists who have arrived spectacularly do not remain. The sophomore record is the filter through which careers pass, and not all of them pass through intact. Taylor Swift passes through with something to spare. Fearless is released in November of 2008. She is 18 years old. The album opens at number 1 on the Billboard 200, the top of the chart, the fullest possible commercial statement, a debut position that speaks not only to the size of her existing audience, but to the appetite for what she is offering. The record does not simply satisfy the people who already love her. It reaches beyond them, into demographic territories that her first album only grazed. Mainstream pop listeners who have no particular investment in country music but who find in these songs something they did not know they were looking for. This crossover quality is worth examining carefully, because it is not accidental, and it is not simply a matter of musical production choices or radio strategy. It is, at its deepest level, a function of the songwriting itself. Taylor Swift writes on Fearless in a mode that is emotionally universal. She takes the specific textures of her own experience and shapes them into something that anyone who has ever been young and in love and terrified and hopeful can recognize as their own. The country instrumentation remains, the steel guitar, the fiddle, the sonic markers of the genre she came up in, but it is deployed in the service of songs that do not require genre fluency to enter. You do not need to love country music to love Fearless. You only need to have felt something, which is to say, you only need to be human. The album's center of gravity falls on 2 songs in particular, each of which becomes, in the months following the album's release, something larger than a hit single. They become cultural artifacts. They become the songs that people associate with entire chapters of their own lives, the songs that play in memory at moments that have nothing to do with a radio or a playlist. The first is Love Story. It arrives with a simplicity that is its great strength. The premise is drawn from Shakespeare. A Romeo and Juliet structure, 2 young people kept apart by forces outside their control, the classic architecture of romantic tragedy, but Taylor Swift does something subversive and joyful with the material. She changes the ending. Her Juliet does not die. Her story does not end in loss. Instead, it ends in exactly the way that every person who has ever watched two people kept apart by impossible circumstances has wished those stories would end, with the arrival of love, undeniable and triumphant, on a balcony or a lawn or wherever it is that hearts finally stop running from each other and turn to face what they have always wanted. It is, in the truest sense of the word, a fairy tale. And it is executed with such technical precision and such emotional authenticity that listeners do not feel they are being given a fantasy. They feel they are being given a hope. There is a difference, and Taylor Swift understands it perfectly. The production is warm and full, building from an intimate verse into a chorus that opens like a door into a larger room. The melody is constructed with the kind of inevitability that the best melodies always have, the sense that the song could not have gone anywhere other than exactly where it goes, that each note is the only possible note in that moment. It is the work of a genuinely gifted melodist, which is a different and arguably rarer skill than lyric writing, and one that Taylor Swift possesses in abundance. Love Story becomes a crossover phenomenon of a scale that surprises even people within the industry who have been watching her career with careful attention. It charts not only in the country format, but across pop radio, across adult contemporary, across formats that have historically maintained clear and enforced distances from country music. It is played in shopping centers and at school dances, and from car radios on summer roads. It becomes, in the particular way that only a handful of songs in any given era do, a piece of the ambient soundtrack of daily life. You Belong With Me follows, and where Love Story reaches toward the romantic ideal, this song plants itself firmly in the recognizable soil of adolescent longing. Its narrator is not the girl who gets the fairy tale ending. She is the girl watching from across the room, from the neighboring yard, from the friend zone that feels, at 17, like a life sentence. She is the girl who knows, she knows with the certainty of long proximity and genuine feeling, that she is the right person, that she understands this boy in a way his current girlfriend does not and cannot. But knowing is not enough. The world does not always reward what it should reward. It is a smaller story than Love Story in some ways. More ordinary. More embarrassing, in the specific way that genuine longing is always slightly embarrassing, because it involves wanting something you do not have and being unable to stop wanting it. And perhaps because of this, because of its willingness to sit with discomfort rather than transcend it immediately, it resonates with a breadth and depth that rivals even the romantic triumph of the earlier song. These two songs are the twin engines of the Fearless era, and they carry the album and their creator into a new order of cultural presence. The year 2009 brings the Fearless Tour, Taylor Swift's first headlining tour, a North American expedition that takes her from arena to arena across the continent and represents, in physical, logistical, and emotional terms, an enormous escalation from anything she has done before. She has performed, of course, has been performing in various capacities since she was a child, singing at basketball games and in community theaters. She has opened for other artists. She has played festivals. But this is different. This is her name on the marquee, her audience filling the seats, her production filling the stage. The scale of it is staggering. An arena is not a club or a theater or even a mid-sized venue. An arena is a machine designed for spectacle. A space so large that the distance between performer and audience must be bridged by technology, by screens and lights and sound systems of extraordinary power, and also by something less tangible but equally essential, the performer's ability to project presence across that distance, to make the person in the farthest seat feel as personally addressed as the person in the front row. Taylor Swift discovers on the Fearless Tour that she can do this. That the same quality that worked at the Bluebird Cafe, that sense of genuine direct communication, of one person telling another person something true, scales. It scales to the arena. It scales to the crowd of thousands. The mechanism is different, the techniques are different, the production requirements are entirely different. But the essential transaction remains the same. A person with something to say, an audience that wants to hear it, and the music that makes the connection possible. The tour is a success by every available measure. The venues are sold out. The reviews are strong. The fans, and they are by now a genuine fan community, with the particular intensity and loyalty that Taylor Swift's relationship with her audience has always generated, receive the shows with an enthusiasm that is, by multiple accounts, something to witness. She is 19 years old, headlining arenas across North America, and she is doing it with a competence and a confidence that suggest, to anyone watching, that she was built for exactly this. And then September arrives. And with it, the MTV Video Music Awards. The VMAs are, by design and by tradition, a spectacle. A ceremony built around the energy of popular music at its most youthful and provocative. An event where the performances and the moments that happen between the performances are often more memorable than anything that has ever been said from a podium. They are unpredictable in the way that live television is always unpredictable, but more so. Anything can happen at the VMAs. That is, in some sense, the point. On this September night in 2009, Taylor Swift wins Best Female Video for You Belong With Me. She walks to the stage in Radio City Music Hall, 19 years old, in a silver dress, holding the Moonman Trophy, and she begins to speak. She is grateful. She is overwhelmed. She is, visibly, a young woman experiencing one of the signal moments of her professional life, a moment she will remember for the rest of her career. She begins her acceptance speech. She does not finish it. From the audience, Kanye West, rapper, producer, one of the most celebrated and controversial figures in American popular music, rises from his seat, walks to the stage, takes the microphone from Taylor Swift's hand, and delivers a statement to the assembled crowd and the watching world. He believes, he says, that a different video, Beyoncé's Single Ladies, deserved the award she is holding. Then he hands the microphone back and walks off the stage. The room is stunned into a silence that lasts approximately 1 second before it becomes noise. Taylor Swift stands at the podium with the trophy and the microphone and no speech left to give, because the moment that the speech belonged to has been taken from her and replaced with something else entirely. Her expression, captured by cameras and reproduced in photographs that will circulate for years afterward, is one of pure and unmediated shock, the face of someone experiencing something they have no framework for, something for which no preparation was possible, because nothing in the ordinary run of professional life prepares a person for this. It is a small moment, measured in seconds. And it is, simultaneously, one of the most discussed moments in the history of the MTV Video Music Awards, which is to say, in the history of a ceremony that has been producing discussed moments for decades. What happens to Taylor Swift in that moment is real, and it is painful. She is a teenager on one of the largest stages in popular music, publicly diminished in front of an audience of millions. The speech she was giving, which belonged to her, which was hers to give, is gone. The moment, which was hers, is gone. In its place is a controversy that she did not create and did not ask for, that involves her but is not, in any meaningful sense, about her. She's the surface on which something else has been written. In the immediate aftermath, the response from the music industry and the broader public is largely one of sympathy. Beyoncé, who is the artist named in West's interruption, demonstrates extraordinary grace when she wins Video of the Year later in the evening. She invites Taylor Swift back to the stage to complete the speech that was taken from her. It is a generous and human gesture, and it provides a kind of restoration, though the original moment cannot be recovered. What has been done cannot be undone. The incident enters the cultural record. It is discussed and debated and analyzed from every conceivable angle in the days and weeks that follow, and then it is not forgotten but absorbed, filed away in the vast archive of things that have happened in public life, available to be retrieved and recontextualized at any moment. It will be retrieved more than once in the years ahead. It will become part of a larger and more complicated story about Taylor Swift's relationship with public conflict and public narrative. It will, in ways that cannot be predicted in September of 2009, shape the music she has not yet written. But the year does not end in September. The year continues. And it ends for Taylor Swift in triumph. The Grammy Awards arrive in January of 2010, carrying with them the formal verdicts of the recording industry on the music of the previous year. Fearless has been submitted for consideration. The nominations have been announced. And on the night of the ceremony, Taylor Swift walks away with 4 Grammy Awards, 4 separate recognitions of the work she has made, the music she has put into the world. The most significant among them, the one that sits at the center of everything and will be referenced for years as a marker of this moment in her career, is Album of the Year. It is the highest honor the Grammys confer. It is the award that says, with the full institutional authority of the Recording Academy, of everything that was made this year, this is the thing that matters most. Taylor Swift receives it at 19 years old. She is, at that moment, the youngest artist in the history of the Grammy Awards to win Album of the Year. It is a record that exists because no one younger has ever made a record important enough to win it, which is to say, it is not a statistical curiosity, but a reflection of genuine achievement. The youngest ever in the history of an award that has been given annually since 1959. She stands at the podium and gives the speech she is allowed to give this time, all the way through without interruption. And in the room and in living rooms across the country and around the world, people who have watched her navigate the past several years, the move to Nashville, the publishing deal, the debut album, the crossover explosion of Fearless, the arena tour, the September night at Radio City Music Hall, feel something that might be called satisfaction or vindication, or simply the pleasure that comes from watching someone who deserves a good thing receive it. She is 19 years old, and she is the best in the world at what she does. The world has now said so formally, in the most official language available to it. She will be back. Chapter 4: The Solo Mandate, Speaking Now Alone, 2010-2011. There is a particular kind of silence that follows triumph. It is not an empty silence, it is full, almost pressurized, loaded with the weight of expectation and the quiet accumulation of other people's opinions. Taylor Swift knows this silence well by the beginning of 2010. She has just won Album of the Year at the Grammy Awards. She has just completed a sold-out arena tour. She has just turned 20. And in the spaces between the applause and the accolades, in the corridors of the industry and the comment sections of the early internet and the columns of music critics who have made careers out of knowing better than their subjects, a question is forming. Did she really write those songs? It is a question asked of female artists with a frequency and a casualness that is rarely applied to their male counterparts. It carries within it a specific skepticism, the suggestion that talent of a certain order, in a certain kind of body, in a certain kind of package, is unlikely to be entirely genuine. That behind the charming teenager with the guitar and the notebook, there must be a room full of adults doing the actual work. That the authenticity, which is the very quality her audience loves most fiercely, is itself a construction. The co-writers are cited. Liz Rose in particular, whose name appears alongside Taylor Swift's on several of the most beloved songs of the first 2 albums. The collaboration is pointed to as evidence that Taylor Swift is not quite what she presents herself as. That the writer-first identity she has built her career upon is, at least partially, a fiction. Taylor Swift hears all of this. She is 20 years old, and she hears it with the full clarity of someone whose professional identity is built on her relationship with language, someone for whom words and what words mean, and what they imply are not abstract matters but the substance of daily life. She processes what is being said about her, and she formulates a response. The response is not a press release. It is not an interview in which she patiently explains her creative process. It is not a measured statement from a publicist designed to manage the narrative. The response is an album. And she is going to write every word of it herself. This decision, to write the entirety of her 3rd studio album without a single co-writer, is one of the most consequential creative choices of Taylor Swift's career. Not because albums written by a single person are inherently superior to collaborative work, they are not, and Taylor Swift knows this better than most, having produced extraordinary songs in partnership with collaborators she respects and admires. The decision is consequential because of what it represents. A refusal to allow other people's doubt to define her. A determination to answer a question about her capabilities by demonstrating those capabilities in the most unambiguous terms available. If the question is whether she can do it alone, she will do it alone. Completely. Every verse, every chorus, every bridge, every line of every song on the record. Solo. No co-writers. No one else's name on the credits alongside hers. Just Taylor Swift, a guitar, a piano, and however many thousands of hours it takes to build an album from nothing. She calls it Speak Now. The title is drawn from the language of wedding ceremonies, that old, formal invitation extended to anyone with an objection, the last moment before a permanent commitment is made. But as a title for this particular album, made under these particular circumstances, it resonates on multiple levels. To speak now is to refuse silence. To speak now is to answer the question before it can harden into assumption. To speak now is to stand up in front of everyone and say, "Here's what I have to say, and I am saying it in my own voice with my own words, and there is no ambiguity about who made this." She is speaking now. The writing process, by any account, is extensive and demanding. There are no collaborative sessions to lighten the load, no moments of creative impasse that can be resolved by calling someone in to look at the problem from a different angle. There is only Taylor Swift and whatever room she is writing in, and the particular discipline that solitary creation requires, the ability to trust your own instincts when there is no one else in the room to confirm them, to push through the moments of doubt that every writer encounters, to resist the temptation to stop when a thing is merely good enough and continue until it is exactly right. She writes 30 or more songs in the process of making the record. Of those, she will select the 14 that best represent the album she is trying to make, that form together a coherent and emotionally complete statement. The songs that do not make the final cut are not failures. They are the working, the practice, the refinement. They are the evidence of a process taken seriously. The music itself is changing. Fearless was warm and open, its production built around the comfortable familiarity of country instrumentation deployed in the service of pop accessibility. Speak Now is something harder-edged, more willing to move through discomfort, more interested in the darker and more complicated registers of emotional experience. There are rock influences that surface in the production, moments where the guitars carry a sharpness and an energy that would have felt out of place on the previous record, where the arrangements push against the sweetness that country music sometimes demands of its artists. This is not an accident. Taylor Swift is 20 years old, and 20 is a different country from 17 or 18. The fairy tales of Fearless were beautiful and true, but they were the truth of someone standing at the beginning of adult life, looking forward with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Speak Now is the truth of someone who has moved further into that life, who has experienced more of it, who has encountered in the actual texture of living a complexity and an ambivalence that does not resolve neatly into a final verse and a satisfying chorus. She writes about this with the same specificity and the same honesty that has always defined her work. She writes characters and situations drawn from her own life and the lives of people around her, populating the album with a cast that is, by design, recognizable to anyone who has read the tabloids or followed the industry gossip with any attention. There is a song about a wedding she attends where she watches a man she once cared for marry someone she believes is wrong for him. There is a song about a famous older actor whose behavior during a brief relationship she found condescending and dismissive. There is a song that is, unmistakably, addressed to a musician who has been publicly critical of her in ways she has not forgotten. The specificity is deliberate. Taylor Swift understands, has always understood since the earliest lessons absorbed in songwriting sessions with Liz Rose, that the detail is where the truth lives. And she is not, on this album, interested in softening the truth into something more comfortable. She is interested in saying exactly what happened and exactly how it felt, and letting the listener decide what to do with that. The album is released in October of 2010. It sells more than 1 million copies in its first week. 1 million copies. In a week. In 2010, when the music industry is in the full throes of the digital disruption that is reshaping every aspect of how music is made and distributed and consumed, when album sales figures across the board are declining, when the metric of the million-unit first week is becoming increasingly rare even for the most established artists, Taylor Swift sells 1 million copies of Speak Now in its first 7 days. The commercial achievement is significant on its own terms. But in the context of the question that inspired the album, the suggestion that perhaps she needed her collaborators more than she let on, that the work was not entirely hers, the sales figure carries additional meaning. The audience has heard the album that Taylor Swift made entirely by herself, and the audience has responded with the most unambiguous statement available to it. They have bought it 1,000,000 times over in a single week. The critical response is, as it always is with her work, a more complicated picture. There are reviewers who note the ambition of the project and recognize the achievement. There are others who find things to question, moments where a co-writer's outside perspective might have sharpened a lyric, structural choices that a collaborator might have challenged. But the conversation about whether Taylor Swift is the author of her own work quiets considerably. It does not disappear entirely. It will resurface in different forms, at different moments in her career. But after Speak Now, it is harder to make that argument with a straight face. She has spoken. Now, the touring that follows is global in its scope and ambition. The Speak Now World Tour is not simply a North American arena run, it is a genuine international expedition, carrying Taylor Swift and her production across multiple continents to audiences who have been following her work from a distance, who know the songs from streaming and radio, and the particular kind of cultural osmosis through which American popular music travels across borders. The tour runs through 2011, playing to enormous crowds in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. The logistics of a global arena tour are staggering in their complexity. The production itself, the staging, the lighting, the video elements, the costume changes, the musicians and dancers and crew who travel with the show, constitutes a small city in perpetual motion. The physical demands on the performer at the center of it are extraordinary. Night after night, in different cities and different time zones, with the accumulated fatigue of travel and performance and the relentless pressure of being the thing around which everything else is organized, it takes a specific kind of endurance, physical and psychological, that goes beyond musical talent into something closer to athletic discipline. Taylor Swift approaches it with the same methodical commitment she has brought to every other aspect of her career. She is not someone who coasts. She is not someone who delivers a competent performance and saves the real energy for the moments that matter most. Every show, from the first to the last, receives the full weight of her attention and her effort, because every show contains people who have made an effort to be there, who have bought tickets and arranged transportation and carved out an evening from the complicated logistics of their lives to come and stand in a room with her. She takes that seriously. She has always taken it seriously. The year 2011 brings formal recognition from the institution that matters most in the world she came from. The Country Music Association names Taylor Swift its Entertainer of the Year. This is not a minor distinction. The CMA Entertainer of the Year is the highest honor in country music, the award that says, above all others, that this is the person who most fully embodies what country music is at this moment, who has connected most deeply and most broadly with the audience that defines the genre. It has been given to the legends of the form, to artists whose names are synonymous with country music's history and identity. To receive it at 21, with only 3 albums and a handful of years in the industry behind you, is to be placed in a company that most artists spend entire careers trying to reach. It is the industry saying, she is the face of this. But even as the CMA is placing her at the center of country music, Taylor Swift is quietly and methodically doing something else. Something that has nothing to do with songwriting or performance or the music itself, but that will prove over time to be one of the most important things she ever does. She is filing trademarks. The trademarks are for her name and her initials, for Taylor Swift and TS and related phrases and formulations. They are legal instruments, dry and procedural and entirely unglamorous, the kind of thing that most people in the music industry do not think about until something goes wrong and they wish they had thought about it earlier. Taylor Swift thinks about it now while things are going well, while she is at the top of her commercial and critical standing, while the machinery of her career is running smoothly and the future looks bright. This is the strategic intelligence that has always operated beneath the surface of her creative life, the part of her that thinks not only about the next song, but about the next decade, not only about the current tour but about the long arc of a career that she intends to control. She has watched the music industry long enough, and watched it with enough attention, to understand that control is not guaranteed. That the things you do not protect have a way of being taken from you. That the name you build, the identity you construct through years of work and sacrifice and genuine creativity, can become someone else's property if you are not careful about who owns it. She is being careful. With the precision and the foresight that have always characterized her approach to her own career, she is filing the paperwork, paying the fees, establishing the legal architecture that will allow her to maintain ownership of the thing she has spent her life building. It is, in its way, as creative an act as writing a song. It is the act of someone who understands that artistry without infrastructure is fragile, that the most beautiful music in the world can be taken from you if you do not understand the systems through which ownership is established and maintained. Taylor Swift understands those systems. She is learning them, formalizing that learning, building it into the foundation of everything she does. The Speak Now era ends with her standing at the center of the country music world, undisputed in her commercial dominance, formally recognized by her industry as its foremost figure, having answered the question of her authorship with an album that bore only her name, having extended her reach across the globe, having laid quietly and without fanfare the legal groundwork for the battles over ownership that lie ahead. She is 21 years old. And she is only just beginning to understand what she is capable of. Chapter 5, The Mosaic of Red, A Pop Convergence 2012-2013. There is a color that exists between warmth and warning. It is the color of autumn leaves at the precise moment before they fall, of a sunset that is beautiful because it is ending, of something that burns because it is alive and because everything alive eventually exhausts itself in the living. It is the color of a feeling that does not have a clean name, something between love and grief, between wanting and losing, between the person you were before something happened to you and the person you became because of it. Taylor Swift calls this color red. She is 22 years old when she begins making the album, and she is making it from a different place than any record she has made before. Not geographically, she is still in Nashville, still surrounded by the infrastructure of the career she has spent a decade building. But internally, emotionally, creatively, she is somewhere new. She has lived more. She has loved more and lost more, and felt the specific kind of disorientation that comes from discovering that the feelings available to adult life are more complicated and more contradictory than anything she has yet written about. The fairy tales of Fearless were true, but they were the truth of someone who still believed, on some fundamental level, that the story would resolve. The solo authorship of Speak Now was true, but it was the truth of someone proving a point. Red is something different. Red is the truth of someone who has been through something, and is not entirely sure yet what to make of it. She sits with this uncertainty. She does not rush to resolve it or explain it away. Instead, she does what she has always done with the things she cannot quite understand. She writes toward them. She writes around them, through them, from multiple angles and at multiple distances, approaching the feeling the way you might approach something hot, testing the air before committing to the full proximity. The result is an album unlike anything she has made before. Not because she has abandoned what she knows, but because she is applying what she knows to more difficult material. Red is, in many ways, her most ambitious record to date. And its ambition is visible not only in the emotional territory it covers, but in the sonic landscape it inhabits. Because Taylor Swift, in making this album, makes a decision that is both creative and strategic. She is going to open the door to the wider world of popular music production and invite some of its most accomplished practitioners inside. Max Martin has been one of the architects of popular music for more than 2 decades by the time he begins working with Taylor Swift. His fingerprints are on some of the most successful songs of the 1990s and 2000s, records by artists who have defined what pop music sounds like at the level of pure sonic construction. He works with an engineer and co-writer named Shellback, and together they constitute a production partnership that understands, with a precision that approaches science, how to make a song feel inevitable. How to construct a chorus that lands with the force of something that has been true all along, but has only just been stated. How to deploy rhythm and melody and production texture in the exact combination that makes a listener want to hear a thing again before it has finished playing. Taylor Swift brings her songs to these collaborators, and what happens in the studio is not a surrender of identity, but a negotiation between identities, between what she has always done and what the wider world of popular music production makes possible. The results are, from the very first single, unmistakable. We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together arrives in the summer of 2012, and it arrives like a signal from a different frequency. It is still Taylor Swift. The conversational directness, the narrative specificity, the sense of a real person speaking to another real person about a real situation, but the production surrounding that voice is something new. It is bright and driving and propulsive, with a momentum that belongs to pop radio rather than country radio. An energy that does not ask the listener to settle in and reflect but instead picks them up and carries them forward. The song is funny in the way that only songs about genuinely exasperating situations can be funny. The exhausted, darkly amused recognition that you have said this before, you have meant it before, and here you are again. The humor and the pain coexist without canceling each other out, which is a difficult tonal balance to achieve, and which Taylor Swift makes sound effortless. It becomes the fastest-selling digital single in history at the time of its release. The number is not the point is what the number represents. An audience of extraordinary size responding immediately and instinctively to something that feels new and also somehow like something they already knew. I Knew You Were Trouble follows, and it goes further. There are elements of dubstep in its production, a genre that exists about as far from the country music world as it is possible to get, while remaining within the general territory of popular music. The song's narrator is not the innocent party. She is someone who walked into a situation with her eyes open and got hurt anyway, and the song holds both of those truths simultaneously, the culpability and the pain, the self-knowledge that arrived too late to be useful. It is a more complicated moral position than Taylor Swift has typically occupied in her public-facing work, and she inhabits it with a willingness that signals a new phase of creative maturity. The pop establishment responds. Top 40 Radio, which has always been aware of Taylor Swift without quite knowing what to do with her country-inflected sound, opens its arms. She is not crossing over from country to pop so much as she is dissolving the border between them, demonstrating, through the sheer quality and commercial force of the music, that the distinction matters less than the song. But the heart of Red, the place where the album's real emotional weight lives, is not in these singles. It is not in the productions shaped by Max Martin and Shellback, as accomplished as those collaborations are. The Heart of Red is in a song that is 5 minutes and 28 seconds long in its original recorded form, that does not have the architecture of a radio single, that is built not around a hook or a chorus designed for repetition, but around the sustained accumulation of detail. Specific, devastating, perfectly chosen detail, in service of an emotional truth so precisely rendered that listeners who have never experienced the specific situation it describes feel, upon hearing it, that they have. The song is called All Too Well. To describe All Too Well, in conventional critical terms, is to immediately feel the inadequacy of conventional critical terms. It is a song about the end of a relationship, which is to say, it is a song about approximately 1/3 of the songs ever written. But what Taylor Swift does within that familiar subject is something that approaches the condition of literature. She does not write about the relationship in the abstract. She does not reach for the general statement, the universal sentiment, the emotion that everyone can map their own experience onto, because it is sufficiently vague. She does the opposite. She goes straight into the specific, into the scarf left at a sister's house, into the refrigerator light, into the autumn leaves that fall as a backdrop to something that is ending, into the exact quality of a look exchanged between two people who both know in that moment what is happening and cannot stop it. Every detail is chosen because it is true. Not literally true necessarily, not verifiably, factually accurate, but emotionally true, which is the deeper truth, the one that matters more. Each image lands with the weight of something retrieved from actual memory, something the writer has turned over many times in the years between the experience and the song, worn smooth by handling but not diminished by it. The song moves through time in a way that mirrors the way memory actually works, not linearly, not chronologically, but associatively, jumping between moments because the emotional logic of recollection does not follow a calendar. You remember what feels connected, what the mind links together by feeling rather than by sequence. All Too Well understands this and builds itself accordingly. It takes the listener through a relationship not as it happened but as it is remembered, which is to say as it lives, incomplete and non-linear and still, even now, charged with the feeling that was present at the time. The final moments of the song are among the most emotionally precise things Taylor Swift has ever written. The shift in the closing section, the turn from the tenderness of memory into something harder, something that names what was wrong about the situation with a clarity that has only become possible with distance, lands with the force of a door closing or opening. It is not entirely clear which, and that ambiguity is part of the point. Among her audience, All Too Well acquires a status that goes beyond ordinary fandom. It becomes a kind of sacred text, a song that listeners return to at particular moments of their lives with a fidelity that resembles not casual listening, but something closer to need. It is the song people play when they are going through something that they cannot yet articulate, because Taylor Swift has already articulated it for them. It is the song that reminds people that their feelings are real, and their experiences are worth honoring, even the ones that hurt. This is what great songwriting does. This is what it has always done. The Red Era is also, however, a period in which the conversation about Taylor Swift begins to shift in ways that she cannot entirely control and that she does not entirely welcome. She is 22, then 23, and she is famous in the way that very few people ever become famous, the kind of famous where your personal life is not merely of interest to people who follow your career but is itself a form of entertainment, a narrative that the media and the public consume with an appetite that does not distinguish between the professional and the private. Her relationships become tabloid material. The men she is seen with are catalogued and speculated about, their presence in her life treated as source material for a story that someone else is writing, with or without her participation. The equation is simple and reductive. Taylor Swift writes songs about her feelings come from her life includes relationships, therefore her relationships are the business of anyone who listens to her music. She has, it is true, always written from personal experience. She has always used the specific details of her own life as the raw material for her art. This is not a secret. It has been the stated foundation of her creative approach from the very beginning. But there is a difference, which the tabloid construction of her personal life does not acknowledge, between an artist who uses her experience as material and a person who is simply living that experience as a human being, with all the privacy and dignity that implies. The scrutiny of this period is intense and, at moments, genuinely intrusive. Every photograph taken in public is analyzed for evidence of whatever narrative is currently being constructed around her. The number of relationships she has had is tallied and commented upon as though it represents data rather than life, as though the ordinary human experience of loving people and sometimes losing them is, in her case, a character flaw to be explained rather than a universal condition to be understood. She observes all of this. She is always observing. And she begins with the quiet deliberateness that characterizes her response to everything that challenges or threatens her, to weave her response into her work. Not defensively, not in the mode of someone lashing out at critics or demanding to be treated differently, but thematically. She begins to write more directly about the experience of being watched, of having your story told by people who were not present for it, of the gap between who you are and who you are reported to be. This theme is present on Red only in embryonic form, a current beneath the surface of the album rather than its central subject. But it is there. It is building. And in the years ahead, as the scrutiny intensifies and the narratives become more elaborate, and the gap between the public construction of Taylor Swift and the private reality of her widens, it will become something she cannot ignore. Red stands then as a bridge in multiple senses. Musically, it bridges the country world she came from and the pop world she is moving toward, occupying a space between the two that is, in retrospect, exactly the right place to stand before making a full transition. Emotionally, it bridges the relative clarity of her earlier work and the more complex, more ambivalent, more genuinely difficult emotional territory she will explore going forward. Thematically, it bridges the private person and the public narrative, beginning the conversation about image and perception and control that will define the next chapter of her career. It is the album that stands in the middle of everything. Behind her, the country world that made her. Ahead of her, the pop landscape that is waiting to be claimed. She is standing at the crossing point, looking in both directions, holding in her hands a record that belongs fully to neither world and therefore, paradoxically, belongs entirely to her. She steps forward. Chapter 6, Synthesizing a Revolution, the 1989 Metamorphosis, 2014-2015. There is a moment in the life of any artist who survives long enough and grows honestly enough when the question of identity becomes unavoidable. Not the public question, not the one being asked in magazines and on television and in the comment sections of the internet, but the private one, the one that gets asked in the quiet of a room where no one else is present, where there is no audience and no camera and no carefully managed narrative. The question that sounds something like, who am I actually, underneath all of the things I have been called and all of the roles I have been assigned? What does my work sound like when it comes entirely from that place, and not from the place where genre expectations and industry conventions and other people's ideas about what I should be making have any authority? Taylor Swift asks herself this question sometime in 2013, and the answer she arrives at surprises her. The answer is synthesizers. The answer is drum machines and processed vocals, and the particular shimmering architecture of sound that belongs to a specific decade, the 1980s, that era of excess and artifice and genuine pop brilliance, when the tools of music production were expanding in ways that nobody fully understood yet, and artists were making things that sounded like nothing that had come before because nothing had come before them. The answer is the music she grew up hearing. Not the country music that defined her professional formation, but the pop music that played in the background of her actual childhood, the music that arrived through the radio and the television, and the general cultural atmosphere of the 1990s, music that was itself looking back at the decade just concluded with a mixture of nostalgia and admiration. She is 24 years old, and she is about to do something that very few artists at her level of success ever do. She is going to voluntarily abandon the genre that made her. Not drift away from it gradually, not edge toward the borders of it while maintaining plausible country credentials, not do what Red did and occupy the middle ground between two worlds. She is going to leave. Completely, formally, with full awareness of what she is doing and why, with the particular courage that belongs to someone who has decided that the authentic thing matters more than the safe thing, even when the safe thing is the thing that has already produced 4 Grammy Awards and multiple chart-topping albums and a global touring operation of extraordinary scale. She goes into the studio with Max Martin and Shellback, with whom she has already worked on the pop-facing elements of Red, and with Ryan Tedder and other collaborators who understand the sonic language she is trying to speak. And she begins to build something that does not sound like Taylor Swift, or rather that sounds like a Taylor Swift that nobody has yet heard, because the Taylor Swift that exists on the records up to this point has been filtered through the conventions of country music, shaped by its expectations and its aesthetics, and this new music is being filtered through nothing except her own instincts about what she wants to say and how she wants to say it. The album is called 1989. Named for the year of her birth, the year that gives the record its sonic inspiration. It is, she says, her first official pop album, the word official doing important work, marking a formal declaration rather than an evolution, a conscious act of category rather than a drift. She is not stumbling into pop. She is choosing it, with the same deliberateness with which she has made every other significant decision of her career. The campaign that precedes the album's release is, in retrospect, one of the most carefully orchestrated rebranding operations in the history of popular music. Taylor Swift and her team understand something that many artists miss, that a transition of this magnitude is not simply a musical event, but a narrative one. The story of the transition has to be told as carefully as the music itself, because the audience, and in her case, the audience is enormous and deeply invested, needs to be brought along on the journey. They need to understand not only that something is changing, but why it is changing and what it means. They need to feel that they are not being left behind, but invited forward. The announcement is made gradually, strategically, in stages, through interviews and social media posts, and the carefully timed release of information that builds anticipation without fully satisfying it. The visual identity of the album is established clearly and early. A specific aesthetic, clean and geometric and referential to the decade in question, that signals the sonic shift before a single note has been heard. The past, the country past, the boots and guitars and pastoral imagery, is gently but deliberately set aside. What arrives in its place is something sleeker, more urban, more deliberately constructed as a visual and conceptual package rather than a musical genre. And then the music arrives. Shake It Off is the first single, and it is a statement of intent so clear and so unambiguous that it almost functions as a manifesto. The song is built around a premise that is both simple and sophisticated, the acknowledgement that other people are always going to say things about you, always going to construct narratives around you, always going to find fault with whatever you do, and the decision, made in full awareness of all of this, to simply continue moving. To shake it off. The phrase is colloquial and immediate and slightly dismissive, and that dismissiveness is the point. It is the sound of someone who has spent years having things said about them, and has arrived at a place where those things no longer have the power to stop her. The production is euphoric. There is brass and percussion, and a rhythm that is essentially irresistible, the kind of beat that moves the body before the mind has had time to process what is happening. It is unabashedly joyful in a way that Taylor Swift's music has not always been. Not the complicated joy of love story, which is threaded through with the anxiety of young love, but something more straightforward, more defiant. A joy that has been earned through difficulty, and that knows its own cost. It goes to number 1. Of course it does. Blank Space follows, and it is the most self-aware thing she has ever made. The song is a satire, an elaborate pitch-perfect, almost gleeful satire, of the media's construction of Taylor Swift as a serial romantic, as someone whose relationships are a carefully managed performance rather than a genuine aspect of human life. She takes the narrative that has been built around her, the one that tallies her relationships, and raises its eyebrows and implies that there is something pathological in the ordinary human experience of loving people across the course of a young life, and she inhabits it completely, plays it to its most extreme conclusion, turns it into a character that is so over the top in its manipulation and its volatility, that the absurdity of the original narrative becomes impossible to ignore. The character of Blank Space is a monster, charming and predatory and fully aware of her own power, collecting men the way other people collect souvenirs, cycling through them with a boredom that borders on sociopathy. It is, in execution, enormously funny. It is also, in conception, one of the most sophisticated pieces of cultural commentary that Taylor Swift has produced, because it does not simply reject the media narrative about her. It weaponizes it, turns it back on itself, demonstrates through exaggeration the precise quality of absurdity that was always embedded in it. The music video amplifies this. Shot in the manner of a gothic romance novel come to life, grand estate, white horses, extravagant wardrobes, the full visual vocabulary of a certain kind of overwrought romantic fantasy, it commits completely to the bit. There is no winking at the camera, no moment where the mask slips and Taylor Swift appears to remind you that she knows this is a performance. The performance is total, and its totality is what makes it work. Bad Blood completes the trilogy of number 1 singles, and the album beneath these singles is a remarkably coherent piece of work. Coherent not in the sense of being predictable or monotonous, but in the sense of having a consistent emotional and sonic identity from beginning to end. Every song on 1989 sounds like it belongs on 1989. Every production choice, every arrangement decision, every vocal performance is in service of the same vision. A pop album that is fully, unapologetically, deliberately pop, and that makes no apology for the pleasures it offers and the pleasures it withholds. The 1989 World Tour begins in the spring of 2015, and it is, from the very first show, something different from what a Taylor Swift concert has been before. The squad is the most visible manifestation of the difference. She has gathered around her, in this period of her life, a group of famous friends, models and actresses and musicians, women who occupy various positions of prominence in popular culture, who appear at shows as surprise guests, who populate her social media presence, who constitute a visible community around the tour. It is photographed and discussed and analyzed with great intensity, celebrated by some as a demonstration of female friendship and solidarity, and criticized by others as a carefully curated image strategy masquerading as genuine connection. Both things may be true simultaneously. The friendship may be real, and the curation may also be real. These are not mutually exclusive conditions, though the discourse around the squad tends to present them as though they are. What is undeniable is the visual effect, the impression, conveyed through 100 photographs and social media posts and surprise stage appearances, of a person at the center of a chosen community, surrounded by women who have achieved things, in a world that often pits successful women against each other rather than beside each other. The shows themselves are spectacular in the precise sense of the word, full of spectacle, built for an audience whose experience of the concert is not simply auditory but visual and emotional and participatory in ways that earlier tours did not attempt. The production values are extraordinary. The staging is elaborate. The surprise guests, drawn from the squad and from the broader landscape of popular music and culture, arrive night after night in different cities, each appearance generating the particular kind of excitement that only genuine surprise can produce. It is, by any measure, one of the most successful tours of its era. Commercially, culturally, in terms of the conversation it generates and the impact it has on the broader landscape of what a pop concert can be. But the 1989 era is not only about music and spectacle. It is also significantly about power, specifically about the power of an artist to demand fair treatment from the platforms that profit from their work. Spotify has been engaged in a complex and contentious negotiation with the music industry for years. Its streaming model, the exchange of unlimited access to recorded music for a per-stream royalty that many artists find inadequate, has generated debate and dissatisfaction across the industry, but few artists at Taylor Swift's level of commercial prominence have been willing to make a public stand against it. The economics of streaming are complicated, and the major labels have their own interests in maintaining relationships with the platforms, and the individual artist who pushes back risks being labeled as out of touch or greedy or simply difficult. Taylor Swift removes her entire catalog from Spotify in November of 2014, citing the inadequacy of the royalty model and the principle that music has value that should be compensated fairly. She writes about it publicly and clearly, not in the language of grievance, but in the language of principle, not "this is unfair to me," but "this is wrong and here is why it is wrong." The argument is economic, but it is also moral, grounded in a belief that the creative work of artists deserves to be treated as what it is, rather than as a content commodity to be made available as cheaply as possible. Apple Music presents a similar confrontation the following year. The company launches its new streaming service with a promotional period during which it will not pay artists royalties on streams. Taylor Swift writes an open letter, addressed directly to Apple, published publicly, laying out her objection with the same clarity and the same moral force. She makes the argument not only on her own behalf, but on behalf of smaller artists who cannot afford not to be paid, who do not have the commercial leverage to absorb a period of non-payment, who are the people most directly and most harmfully affected by the policy. Apple reverses its policy within 24 hours. Within a day of the letter being published, one of the most powerful technology companies in the world has changed its approach to artist compensation because Taylor Swift wrote a letter and signed her name to it. This is what it looks like when someone understands the full extent of their power and uses it deliberately and on behalf of something larger than themselves. The Grammy Awards arrive in February of 2016, and 1989 is on the table for Album of the Year, the award she won once before for Fearless at 19, setting the record for youngest recipient in the award's history. She is 26 now, and the question of whether she can win it again is the kind of question that the music industry rarely has to answer, because most artists do not make two albums in a career that are both genuinely, independently deserving of the top prize. She wins Album of the Year for the second time. The first woman in the history of the Grammy Awards to win it twice as a lead artist. Not the first person, the first woman. The record exists because the award has been given since 1959, and in all of those decades, with all of those albums, with all of those artists, no woman has ever stood at the podium for this award twice. Until now. She stands at the podium and she speaks, and in her speech she says something that lands with the force of something long considered and carefully chosen. She thanks the people who helped make the album, and then she pauses, and she addresses the young women in the audience and watching at home, and she tells them something about what it means to build a career on your own terms, about the voices that will tell you that your success belongs to someone else, to a relationship or a lucky break or the machinery of an industry, and about the importance of knowing in yourself where the work actually came from. It is, in its way, a continuation of the answer she gave when she wrote Speak Now Alone. A continuation of the argument she has been making, in various forms and through various mediums, since she was 14 years old, and signing publishing deals that recognized her as a writer. The work is hers. The Grammy is hers. The story is hers. She holds the trophy, and the room applauds, and outside in the world the machines of popular culture are already preparing the next narrative, the next story about who she is and what she represents and what should be said about her. She knows this. She has always known this. She walks off stage and begins writing what comes next. Chapter 7, Silence and the Serpent, Reclaiming a Reputation, 2016 to 2018. There is a specific quality to public silence when it belongs to someone who is ordinarily very present. It has a texture to it, a weight. It accumulates in the spaces where a person used to be, in the feeds and the headlines and the cultural conversation, and it means different things to different observers. To some it means defeat. To others it means regrouping. To the person inside the silence, it can mean both of those things at once, and also something else entirely, the particular clarity that arrives only when the noise has stopped, and you are left alone with the question of who you actually are when no one is watching. Taylor Swift goes quiet in 2016. To understand what this silence means, it is necessary to understand what preceded it, to trace the sequence of events that begins with a phone call and ends with a cultural moment of unusual ferocity. The history between Taylor Swift and Kanye West is by this point already 7 years old. The night at Radio City Music Hall in 2009, the interrupted speech, the moonman held in suddenly uncertain hands, all of it is part of the established record. There had been a public reconciliation of sorts in the years following. A careful mutual acknowledgement that what happened had happened, and that the two artists could coexist in the same industry without the incident defining their entire relationship to each other. But the piece, it turns out, is not as solid as it appears. In early 2016, Kanye West releases a song that contains a lyric about Taylor Swift, a lyric that is explicit and objectifying, and that treats her as a prop in a narrative about his own greatness. The lyric is discussed and dissected, and the question of whether Taylor Swift approved it becomes the central point of public debate. Her representative states that she was not aware of the specific lyric and did not approve it. Kanye West's position is that she was consulted and gave her blessing. Then Kim Kardashian, West's wife, and one of the most followed people on social media in the world, releases a recording, portions of a phone call between Taylor Swift and Kanye West, captured without her knowledge and edited in ways that are not immediately obvious to the viewer. The footage spreads across the internet with a speed and a force that is characteristic of this moment in digital culture, when a piece of content can move from one person's phone to 10 million phones in the span of hours. It is presented as evidence. It is consumed as verdict. The response is immediate and overwhelming. The hashtag that trends globally is 3 words: Taylor Swift is over. The snake emoji fills her social media mentions. Thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions of small digital serpents crawling across every surface of her online presence. She is called a liar. She is called a manipulator. She is called calculating, which is a word that has followed her since the beginning, but that now carries a different charge. No longer the grudging acknowledgement of professional intelligence, but an accusation of personal dishonesty. She is, in the language of 2016's internet, cancelled. What this means in practice is that the narrative around Taylor Swift, which she has worked with enormous effort and considerable skill to maintain a degree of control over for more than a decade, is suddenly and completely out of her hands. The story being told about her is not her story. It is a story assembled from fragments. A phone call she did not know was being recorded, an editing process she had no part in, a public conversation she is not present for and cannot adequately respond to in real time. The machine of social media does not wait for context or nuance or the kind of complexity that actual situations usually contain. It moves fast and it judges faster, and once a verdict has been delivered at sufficient volume, it becomes very difficult to appeal. She looks at all of this, at the millions of snake emojis, at the headlines, at the consensus that has formed around a version of her that she does not recognize, and she makes a decision. She disappears. Not physically. She is still in the world, still living her life, still in the rooms and the studios where her work gets made. But publicly, she vanishes. The social media accounts go quiet. The press appearances stop. The carefully managed drip of content and image and narrative that has been a constant feature of her public life for years simply ceases. She does not explain the silence. She does not post a statement. She does not engage with the conversation that is continuing without her, loudly and at considerable length, in every corner of the internet. She simply steps back. And the silence begins. For nearly a year, Taylor Swift is absent from the public conversation in any meaningful way. And in that year something happens, not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, with the particular slowness of something that is being made rather than simply felt. She is writing. She is making something in the dark, in the quiet, away from the lights and the cameras and the relentless apparatus of modern celebrity. She is building a response, but not the kind of response that her detractors might expect. Not a press tour or a carefully worded statement or a public reconciliation designed to manage the narrative. She is building an album. And the album is called Reputation. The title announces something. A reputation is what other people think of you. It is the accumulated weight of external judgment, the sum of every story told about you by people who may or may not have been present for the events they are describing. A reputation is, in a fundamental sense, not yours. It belongs to the people who hold it, who built it, who maintain it through the retelling of certain stories and the suppression of others. Taylor Swift has always understood this, has always navigated the gap between her own sense of herself and the public construction that bears her name. But Reputation is the first album that makes this gap its explicit subject, that turns the experience of being a public person in the age of social media into the raw material of the art itself. The album arrives in November of 2017, and it arrives with a deliberateness of presentation that has characterized every significant release of her career. But this time the presentation is darker, more aggressive, more willing to sit in discomfort rather than move through it quickly. The aesthetic is black and white and sharp-edged. The imagery is unmistakably serpentine, snakes woven through the visuals, the symbol that was used against her now claimed, repurposed, turned from weapon to emblem. If you are going to call me a snake, the imagery says, then I will be the most magnificent snake you have ever seen. The music reflects this reclamation. The production is the most sonically aggressive of her career. Darker beats, distorted elements, the influence of hip-hop and trap music present in the construction of the sound in ways that surprise listeners who have been with her since the country albums. She is working with producers who understand this sonic language, Jack Antonoff, who will become one of the most important creative relationships of this period of her career, and Richard Lawing, and others who can build the specific atmosphere of contained menace and defiant confidence that the album requires. The opening of the record functions almost like a statement of artistic intent. The voice that introduces the album is not the warm, confessional voice of the earlier records. It is something cooler, more guarded, more aware of the distance between performance and self. I'm sorry, it says over a low pulse of sound, the old Taylor can't come to the phone right now. Why? Oh, because she's dead. It is theatrical. It is knowing. It is, in the way that the best theatrical gestures always are, also completely sincere, a genuine declaration that the version of Taylor Swift who existed before 2016, the carefully maintained persona of the girl next door with the guitar and the cat and the baking and the effortless relatability, has been retired. Not because it was false, much of it was true or true enough, but because it is no longer sufficient. What is coming is something that has been through something. Something that has been called a snake and has decided to agree. The album moves through multiple emotional registers, from the dark swagger of its opening tracks through the vulnerability of its middle section into something that, by the end, resolves into a kind of cautious, hard-won tenderness. There is a love story embedded in Reputation, quieter than the ones she has told before, more private, more carefully guarded, the beginning of a relationship that she holds close rather than broadcasting, that she allows to exist in the margins of the public record rather than at its center. It is, in its way, one of the most revealing things about the album, that even here, in the record most explicitly concerned with public image and private self, she finds a way to protect something genuine from the machinery of observation. But before the album, there is something else. Something that happens in a courtroom in Denver, Colorado, in the summer of 2017, that is entirely separate from the music and the image and the serpent iconography, and that may, in the long run, matter more than any of it. In 2013, a radio host named David Muller groped Taylor Swift during a photo opportunity before a concert. She reported it. He was fired from his job and subsequently sued her for defamation, claiming that her report had cost him his career. She countersued for a single dollar, $1 symbolic and precise, on the grounds of sexual assault. The case goes to trial in August of 2017. Taylor Swift takes the witness stand. She is 27 years old, and she is in a courtroom, and she is being questioned by a lawyer whose job is to undermine her account of what happened to her body without her consent. The questioning is, by multiple accounts, aggressive. It attempts to place responsibility on her, to suggest that she should have been more aware, more careful, that the incident was somehow the result of her own failure to manage the situation. She answers every question directly. She does not flinch. She does not soften her account or qualify it into something more comfortable. When the lawyer suggests that she bears some responsibility for what happened, she responds with a clarity and a composure that silences the courtroom. She says, simply and completely, that what happened to her is not her fault. That the only person responsible for an act of assault is the person who committed it. The jury agrees. Mueller's case is dismissed. Taylor Swift is awarded the dollar she asked for. She announces that she will donate to organizations supporting sexual assault survivors. The dollar is not the point. The point is the standing. The standing up, in a room full of people under oath under aggressive questioning, and telling the truth about what happened, refusing to be made small, refusing to accept the reframing, refusing to let what was done to her become something she is responsible for. It is, in its way, the most direct and unmediated demonstration of the quality that has always been at the center of Taylor Swift's public identity, the refusal to be defined by forces outside herself. The refusal to accept a story that is not true. The insistence on telling her own version in her own voice and standing behind it completely. The Reputation Stadium Tour begins in May of 2018, and the numbers it generates are of a scale that requires a moment to absorb. By the time it concludes, it has become the highest-grossing tour in American history, surpassing every concert tour by every artist who has ever played the United States, in any genre at any time. The record is not a narrow victory. It is a statement. The production is extraordinary, a stadium-scale elaboration of the album's serpent imagery, with massive inflatable snakes rising above the stage, with lighting and video and staging that creates an atmosphere of dark theatrical spectacle unlike anything she has previously attempted. The show understands that it is not simply a concert but a narrative event, that the audience attending it has followed the story of the previous 2 years, has been present for the cancellation and the silence and the return, and deserves a show that acknowledges all of that and transforms it into something cathartic and communal. The fans respond with the particular intensity of people who have remained loyal through difficulty. The crowds are enormous. The noise they make is the noise of people who feel, in some complicated and deeply human way, that their own perseverance is being reflected back at them from the stage, that the story of surviving a period of public condemnation and returning stronger is not only Taylor Swift's story but theirs, in whatever private way each of them has faced their own period of being misunderstood or dismissed or written off. She stands on those stages, surrounded by the serpents she has reclaimed, and she performs to the largest audiences of her career. The canceled artist filling stadiums. The snake flying. There is a satisfaction in this that goes beyond the commercial record. It is the satisfaction of a story that has found its proper shape, of a narrative that moved through darkness and emerged, not unchanged, not unmarked, but intact. Still standing. Still writing. Still after everything hers. Chapter 8, Daylight and the Battle for Masters, 2019. There is a particular kind of joy that arrives after a long period of difficulty, not the uncomplicated joy of someone who has never been through anything, but the more durable, more self-aware joy of someone who has been through something significant and has come out the other side still recognizably themselves. It is a joy that knows its own cost. It is a joy that has been earned. And it is this specific quality of feeling, hard-won, clear-eyed, genuinely luminous, that Taylor Swift carries into 2019 and pours into the record she is making. The record is called Lover. But before the record, there is a decision. A consequential, carefully considered, professionally significant decision that Taylor Swift makes in 2018, and that will reverberate through the rest of her career in ways that neither she nor anyone else can fully predict at the moment it is made. She is leaving Big Machine Records. The departure is not impulsive. Nothing Taylor Swift does professionally is impulsive. She has been with Big Machine since she was 14 years old, since the November night at the Bluebird Cafe when Scott Borchetta watched her perform and saw something worth building around. The label has been the institutional home of her entire career, the infrastructure within which every album from the self-titled debut through Reputation has been made and released and promoted. It is, in the most literal sense, the house she grew up in professionally. Leaving it is not a small thing. But the terms of staying are not terms she is willing to accept. The specific nature of the negotiation between Taylor Swift and Big Machine Records in 2018 involves a question that goes to the very heart of what it means to be a recording artist in the modern music industry, the question of who owns the master recordings. A master recording is the original, definitive version of a recorded song, the thing from which all copies are made, from which all streaming royalties flow, from which all licensing fees are generated when a song is placed in a film or a television commercial or a trailer or any of the other commercial contexts in which music generates revenue. Whoever owns the master owns, in a very real sense, the song, not the composition, which is a separate matter governed by publishing rights, but the recorded performance, the specific artifact that the world knows. Taylor Swift does not own her masters. This is not unusual in the music industry. It is, in fact, the standard arrangement under which most major label artists have operated for decades. The label finances the recording, and in exchange it retains ownership of the resulting product. The artist receives royalties, which is to say a percentage of the revenue generated by the recordings, but the recordings themselves belong to the label. This arrangement has been accepted, sometimes grudgingly and sometimes without full understanding of its implications, by generations of artists who needed the label's resources to make and distribute their music, and who were willing to pay the price of ownership to access those resources. Taylor Swift has understood for some time what this arrangement means. She has watched the music industry change around her, has watched streaming alter the economics of recorded music, has watched the value of catalog recordings increase as streaming platforms have made back catalogs more accessible than ever before, has watched the masters she does not own become more valuable year by year. She has been arguing in her negotiations with Big Machine for the right to own what she creates going forward. She wants her masters. The terms offered, as she will later describe them publicly, involve a provision by which she would receive ownership of one album's worth of masters for each new album she records for the label. It is a structure that, in her assessment, is not an equitable exchange, that requires her to produce new work in order to gain retroactive ownership of old work, in a cycle that keeps her perpetually in debt to the institution she is trying to become independent from. She declines. She signs instead with Republic Records and Universal Music Group. And the contract she signs contains a provision that is, in the context of major label deals, genuinely unusual. She will own the master recordings of everything she creates under this new agreement from the very beginning. There is no earning back period, no accumulated debt of future albums required to unlock ownership of past ones. What she makes going forward will be hers. It is, in the language of the music industry, an extraordinary concession for a label to make. It is also a demonstration of something that has become increasingly clear over the course of Taylor Swift's career, that her leverage at this point is extraordinary. She's one of the most commercially successful recording artists in the world, and the label that signs her gets the benefit of that commercial success. In exchange, she is in a position to demand terms that would be unavailable to almost any other artist. She demands them. She receives them. The future from this moment forward is hers to own. And so, having secured the architecture of her future, she turns her attention to the music. The music of Lover is, from its very first moments, a deliberate and joyful departure from the atmosphere of Reputation. Where that album was dark and guarded and wrapped in the imagery of conflict, Lover is saturated with color, literally and figuratively. The aesthetic palette is pastel and bright, hearts and rainbows, and the particular visual vocabulary of romantic optimism. The sound is open and warm, the synthesizers of the 1989 era deployed here not in the service of cool detachment but of genuine, uncomplicated feeling. She is in love. Genuinely, privately, durably in love, with a person she has been careful to shield from the full intensity of public attention, because she has learned, across the years and the relationships that have been photographed and analyzed and turned into tabloid narratives, that the things you protect have a better chance of remaining whole. The love is real, and it is unforming the record, and it produces some of the most openly tender music she has made since Fearless. The title track is a piece of songwriting that operates in the oldest and simplest tradition of the love song. The declaration, made without irony or qualification, that the person you are with is the person you choose, completely and across the full span of what choosing someone means. It is a wedding song in the spirit of vows rather than celebration, not the party but the promise, not the event but the intention. It is also, in the context of Taylor Swift's catalog, a striking act of emotional openness. She has always written from personal experience, but the vulnerability here is different from the vulnerability of heartbreak. It is the vulnerability of happiness, of saying out loud that you have something precious, which is always also to acknowledge that precious things can be lost. The album contains multitudes in the way that her best albums always do, moving from the euphoria of its romantic center, into the political and the personal, into moments of self-examination and social commentary that sit alongside the love songs without diminishing them. You Need to Calm Down addresses homophobia with a directness and a specificity that represents her most explicit political statement to date. A pop song that is also unmistakably an argument made in the language of popular culture rather than the language of policy, but no less sincere for that. She has been, for most of her career, careful about public political statements. The caution has its origins in a specific incident: her silence during the 2016 election, which was noted and criticized, and which she has described in retrospect as a failure of courage. She was afraid, she will say later, of the consequences of speaking, afraid of being wrong, afraid of the backlash, afraid of the ways in which a celebrity's political opinions can be weaponized against them in a culture that is deeply and sometimes viciously polarized. The fear was real, and she let it govern her, and she has not forgiven herself entirely for it. The reckoning with this silence is part of what the Lover era represents. She begins speaking. Not loudly, not all at once, but with increasing clarity and increasing willingness to accept the consequences. She endorses candidates in the 2018 Tennessee Senate race, a state with a specific political landscape where her endorsement carries particular weight and particular risk, and the response is immediate and enormous. Voter registration surges in the days following her posts. The impact is measurable. She is learning what it means to use her platform for something beyond the promotion of her music, and she is learning that the risk she feared is survivable. Miss Americana is the document of this learning. The Netflix documentary, filmed over the course of several years and released in early 2020, is the most direct and unmediated self-portrait she has ever made available to the public. It is not a concert film or a behind-the-scenes promotional piece. It is an attempt at genuine self-examination, at showing not the polished, managed version of Taylor Swift that the public has always received, but the actual person behind it. The person who has struggled with an eating disorder, who has internalized the need for external validation to a degree that she recognizes now as damaging. The person who made herself into whatever she thought people wanted her to be, because the alternative, being herself and being rejected, felt unbearable. The eating disorder is disclosed with a matter-of-factness that is more affecting than any dramatic revelation could be. She describes the mechanism of it, the way that a photograph or a comment or the simple act of seeing herself on screen and comparing what she sees to what she thinks she should see can trigger a pattern of restriction. She describes recognizing it. She describes with less certainty and less resolution the ongoing work of living with it. It is not a triumphant narrative of recovery. It is an honest account of a continuing process, told by someone who understands that her honesty about it may reach people who are living something similar and who need to know that they are not alone in it. The political awakening documented in Miss Americana is equally unresolved, equally honest. She talks about the fear she felt before speaking publicly about political matters, and she talks about the specific events, the sexual assault trial, the experience of 2016, the accumulation of moments in which silence felt increasingly like complicity, that moved her toward speech. She talks about the resistance she encountered, even from people in her own professional circle, who worried about the commercial consequences of political engagement. She talks about deciding to do it anyway. This is the arc of the documentary, and in a larger sense, the arc of this period of her life, the movement from management to authenticity, from the carefully constructed public self to something more real and more risky and more genuinely hers. It is not a complete transformation. She is still Taylor Swift, still operating within the structures of celebrity and commerce that have always governed her public life. But something has shifted in the proportion. The management is still there, but it is no longer the whole story. And then in June of 2019, the whole story changes again. The announcement arrives on a Sunday. Scooter Braun, music manager, entertainment industry figure, the man who has guided the careers of several major artists, has acquired Ithaca Holdings, the company that owns Big Machine Records. The acquisition includes Big Machine's catalog. The catalog includes the master recordings of Taylor Swift's first 6 albums. She learns about it, she will say later, the same way everyone else does. From the announcement. She was not consulted. She was not offered the opportunity to purchase the masters herself. They were sold, as part of a larger business transaction, to someone with whom she has a specific and documented history of conflict, someone who represents, in her account of things, a particular strand of the industry's relationship to artists, in which the commercial value of a person's creative output is treated as entirely separable from the person who created it. Her response is immediate and public. She publishes a statement, a long, detailed, emotionally direct account of what has happened and how she experiences it, on Tumblr and later on other platforms, and it reads like everything she writes, with specificity, with feeling, with a precision of language that is the product of someone who has spent her entire adult life thinking carefully about what words mean and what they do. She calls the situation her worst-case scenario. She describes the masters as being sold to someone she considers her nemesis. She explains, for an audience that may not have thought deeply about the economics of music ownership, what master recordings are and why they matter, and what it means that hers now belong to someone she did not choose. She is not writing for the industry insiders, who already understand all of this. She is writing for her fans, for the general public, for the millions of people who love her music, without necessarily knowing the business structures that govern it. She is, in the act of writing this statement, doing something that has always been one of her most powerful and distinctive capabilities: translating complexity into feeling and feeling into action. The response from the public is enormous. The conversation about masters ownership, about the structures of the music industry, about the relationship between artists and the institutions that profit from their work, all of it enters mainstream discourse with a force and a breadth that it has never previously achieved. Ordinary listeners, who had never thought about the difference between publishing rights and master recordings, are now thinking about it. The issue has been made human, has been given a face and a story and an emotional stakes, in the way that only a story involving someone people care about can achieve. And she announces her intention: she will re-record her first 6 albums. It is an audacious plan. The re-recordings will not give her back the originals. Those recordings, the ones made when she was 16 and 19 and 22, and the specific sound of her voice in those specific rooms at those specific moments in her life, belonged to Scooter Braun. But the re-recordings will create new masters, owned entirely by her, that can compete with the originals in the marketplace. If fans stream and purchase the new versions rather than the old ones, the commercial value of the original masters is diminished. The leverage that ownership of those recordings confers is reduced. The business logic of the acquisition is undermined. It is, like so many of the moves that have defined her career, both an emotional response and a strategic one, both an act of grief and defiance and a carefully considered plan of action. It is the move of someone who has been through enough, and learned enough, and built enough of her own power, to understand that the best response to being outmaneuvered is not to accept the outcome but to change the terms of the game. She is 30 years old, and she is about to re-record her entire catalog, and she is going to do it while simultaneously making new music, while performing, while navigating the full complexity of a life that has been lived almost entirely in public view. The daylight of the Lover era has a shadow in it then. The pastels and the rainbows and the genuine, luminous joy of the romantic record exist alongside the loss of the masters, alongside the reckoning of Miss Americana, alongside the growing political engagement and the personal honesty that is beginning to feel not like a strategic choice, but like a necessity. She cannot be managed into silence anymore. The cost of silence has become too clear, too personal, too much like a betrayal of herself. She has found her voice in all the ways that phrase can mean. The voice that sings the songs. The voice that speaks in courtrooms and in open letters, and in Tumblr posts, and in documentaries that show her crying in a kitchen about the weight of other people's expectations. The voice that says, simply and completely and without apology, "This is mine and I am taking it back." All of it. Every note. Every word. Hers. Oh, you have been listening to Resonance and Reclamation, the definitive Taylor Swift biography. As 2026 unfolds, the trees of Wyomissing continue to grow slowly and endure. Somewhere, right now, a woman stands in the lights and sings something she wrote alone in a room, making thousands of people feel that their most private stories are being told. And somewhere else, she is already writing the next one. Thank you for joining us for this journey through the art and the architecture, the song and the structure, and the enduring magic of a life lived in tune with the world. Chapter 9, Cabin in the Woods, The Folklorian Pivot 2020-2021. The world stops in March of 2020. Not gradually, not with the slow accumulation of warning signs that might allow for adjustment and preparation, but suddenly, the way a door closes, the way a light goes out. The infrastructure of ordinary life, which most people move through without thinking about its underlying fragility, reveals itself to be fragile. Borders close. Planes stop flying. The venues and the stadiums and the arenas where music has always been received in the ancient, irreplaceable way, bodies in a room together, sound moving through shared air, go dark and silent. The touring industry, which has been the financial backbone of the music business for a generation, ceases to exist. Taylor Swift had plans for 2020. There were shows scheduled, appearances planned, the ongoing machinery of a career that has been in continuous forward motion for nearly 15 years. All of it stops. She is at home, in the sudden stillness that the pandemic imposes on everyone equally, and that feels in the first weeks like something between a pause and an ending, like the world is holding its breath waiting to find out what comes next. What comes next for Taylor Swift is something nobody sees coming. She goes into the woods. Not literally, though the imagery of the album she is about to make will draw heavily on the vocabulary of forests and cabins, and the particular quality of solitude that belongs to places far from the noise of ordinary life. She goes into the woods of her own imagination, into a creative space that is quieter and more interior than anything she has publicly inhabited before, and she begins to write in a way that she has never quite written before. The pandemic has done something unexpected to her creative process. It has removed all at once the entire apparatus of the public-facing life, the touring and the appearances and the strategic releases and the carefully managed narrative that has always existed alongside the writing, has always been the context within which the writing takes place. And in the absence of all of that, something shifts. The pressure to produce work that functions within the machinery of commercial pop music, that fits radio formats and streaming algorithms, and the expectations of an audience that has come to know her in a particular way, loosens. She is alone, or nearly so, and the question of what she wants to make when no one is watching becomes suddenly the only question that matters. The answer arrives with surprising clarity. She calls Aaron Dessner. Dessner is a musician and producer best known as one half of the indie rock band The National, a group whose music exists in a register that is quite distant from the world of stadium pop, characterized by literary lyrical sensibility, by arrangements that prioritize atmosphere over hook, by a willingness to sit in emotional complexity without resolving it prematurely. He and Taylor Swift have mutual friends and mutual admirers, have existed in overlapping circles without ever directly collaborating. She reaches out to him in the early months of the pandemic, and what begins as a conversation becomes, almost immediately, a creative partnership of extraordinary productivity. They work remotely, which is to say they work in the way that the pandemic has made necessary, Dessner building instrumental tracks in his home studio, sending them to Taylor Swift writing and recording over them, the music passing back and forth between them in digital files rather than in the same room. It is a process that, for some collaborations, might produce something generic or disconnected, music that sounds like it was made by people who never occupied the same physical space. But for this collaboration, in this moment, it produces something else entirely. It produces folklore. The album is announced with less than a week's notice in July of 2020, an extraordinarily compressed rollout by the standards of major label pop releases, which typically involve months of strategic preparation and graduated reveals. There are no singles sent to radio in advance. There is no extended promotional campaign. There is a statement, and then almost immediately there is the music. The brevity of the announcement is itself a statement. This is not a product launch. This is an album, made because it needed to be made, offered to the world without the full machinery of commercial presentation, because the full machinery of commercial presentation would be wrong for what this is. What this is, it turns out, is something genuinely new in Taylor Swift's catalog, and yet also something that feels, paradoxically, like the fullest expression of what she has always been at her most essential. Folklore is a songwriter's album in the deepest sense. It is built on language and atmosphere and the kind of patient, unhurried storytelling that does not announce itself but simply unfolds, trusting the listener to follow where it leads. The production, shaped by Dessner and by Jack Antonoff, who has been a close creative collaborator since the 1989 era and who brings a different but complementary sensibility to the material, is spare and textural. Acoustic guitars, piano, strings used not for grandeur but for intimacy. The beats where they exist are subtle, more felt than heard, providing forward motion without dominating the space. The overall effect is of music that breathes, that has room in it for silence, for the spaces between notes where meaning sometimes lives more fully than in the notes themselves. And the lyrics are operating at a level of ambition and accomplishment that surprises even devoted listeners of her earlier work. Taylor Swift has always been a narrative songwriter, has always understood that specificity of detail is the mechanism through which emotional truth is delivered. But on Folklore she does something new with that understanding. She steps sideways into fiction. She writes characters who are not her, places them in situations she has not experienced, imagines their inner lives with the same precision and care she has always brought to her own. She calls it putting herself in other people's perspectives. And the effect is of a songwriter who has discovered that the best way to tell the truth is sometimes to tell someone else's story. The most elaborate expression of this is the triangular narrative that runs through 3 songs on the album, Cardigan, August, and Betty, each of which tells the same story from a different perspective. A teenage love triangle, rendered from the inside of each of its 3 participants in turn: the girl at home waiting, the girl who was a summer interlude, knowing it was temporary and choosing it anyway, and the boy who made a mistake and is trying to find his way back. It is a structural accomplishment as much as a lyrical one, the kind of thing that a novelist might attempt, the telling of a single story in multiple voices, each of which is partial and self-interested in the way that all first-person narration is partial and self-interested. The full picture only emerges when all three perspectives are held simultaneously, and the listener is the one who must do the holding. It is, simply put, some of the finest work she has ever done. The critical reception to Folklore is unlike anything Taylor Swift has previously experienced. The reviewers who have always acknowledged her commercial gifts while maintaining a certain critical distance from her work, who have praised her songwriting, while implicitly reserving their highest enthusiasm for music that exists outside the pop mainstream, respond to this album differently. They respond to it as art. Not as successful pop product, not as impressive commercial achievement, but as a genuine artistic statement that deserves to be evaluated on the terms of serious music. The word masterpiece appears. It appears more than once. The Grammy for Album of the Year is her third. It is awarded in March of 2021 for an album that was written, recorded, and released in the span of a few months in the middle of a global pandemic, in collaboration conducted almost entirely through digital file transfers, announced to the world with less than a week's notice. It is perhaps the most extraordinary production story of any of her Grammy-winning albums, and it is also, in the judgment of the Recording Academy, the best album of its year. She becomes the first solo artist to win Album of the Year 3 times. But Folklore is only the first half of the story of 2020. Before the year is out, she goes back into the studio, returns to the creative space that Folklore opened, and discovers that there is more there, that the door she pushed open in the spring and summer of the year leads to a larger room than she initially understood. The second album, Evermore, is described by Taylor Swift as Folklore's sister record. Not a sequel exactly, not a continuation, but a companion. A record that exists in the same tonal and aesthetic universe, that shares Folklore's commitment to narrative and atmosphere, and the particular quality of restraint that both albums wear like a kind of dignity. Evermore is released in December of 2020, and it demonstrates, among other things, an extraordinary creative stamina, the ability to sustain a high level of artistic invention across not one but 2 albums released in the same year, without repetition, without diminishment, without the sense that the second album is simply more of the first. It has its own emotional center, its own collection of extraordinary songs, its own contribution to the argument that these 2 albums together represent a sustained achievement of unusual significance. The collaborations on Evermore extend outward, most notably to Bon Iver, the project of Justin Vernon, whose vocal presence on the duet Exile creates one of the most emotionally complex pieces of music in either album's catalog. The song is a breakup recounted from both sides simultaneously, not in alternating verses but in overlapping voices, each one discovering as they speak that they were experiencing the same relationship entirely differently. It is heartbreaking in the specific way that only genuine miscommunication can be heartbreaking. The sadness not of cruelty but of 2 people who meant well and could not, despite that, find each other. And then, as 2021 arrives, and the world begins its slow, unsteady process of reopening, Taylor Swift turns her attention to the project she announced in the heat of 2019, in the immediate aftermath of the Scooter Braun acquisition. She begins re-recording. Fearless, Taylor's version, arrives in April of 2021. The parenthetical is important. It is the formal designation that distinguishes the new recordings from the originals, a typographical mark that carries enormous legal and commercial weight. These are not remakes or reimaginings. They are re-recordings, the same songs as faithfully reproduced as possible, with the intention of providing listeners who want to support Taylor Swift directly with a version of the music that sends its royalties to her rather than to the people who own the original masters. The reception is extraordinary. The fans, the enormous, devoted, multi-generational community that has accumulated around her work across nearly 2 decades, respond with the kind of organized, coordinated action that has become one of the distinctive features of her fanbase. They stream the new versions. They purchase them. They make explicit public commitments to play Taylor's version, rather than the original on every platform that offers both. The gesture is partly financial, directing streaming revenue toward Taylor Swift rather than toward Scooter Braun, and partly symbolic, a collective act of loyalty that says, "We are with you in this, we understand what it means, we are willing to put our listening habits in the service of a principle." The vault tracks are a revelation that no one anticipated fully, even those who have followed the re-recording project with close attention. Each Taylor's version includes previously unreleased songs, compositions from the original album era that were written but not included on the final record, now emerging into the world for the first time, in some cases a decade or more after they were created. They are designated as being from the vault, and the phrase acquires a specific resonance among fans, the sense of recovered material, of history being restored, of a more complete version of the artistic record becoming available. Red, Taylor's version, arrives in November of 2021, and with it comes the event that no one in the music industry quite has a framework for. The 10-minute version of All Too Well. The original All Too Well, as it appeared on Red in 2012, was already considered among the finest songs of her career, a 5.5-minute piece of narrative songwriting that had achieved in the decade since its release a kind of legendary status among her most devoted listeners. But the story, known within her fanbase for years, was that the original recording was much longer, that the version on the album was a distillation of a more expansive original, that something had been left out that the full song contained. The 10-minute version is that original, or something close to it, the song as it was first written before the editing process that produced the album version, now restored to its full length and released to the world as part of the re-recording project. It is 10 minutes and 13 seconds long. By every conventional measure of commercial music, it is too long. Radio will not play it. Streaming algorithms are not designed for it. It does not fit the formats that have governed the distribution of popular music for generations. It goes to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. A 10-minute song about the end of a relationship, written by a 31-year-old woman about an experience she had when she was 22, performed now with the voice and the understanding of someone who has lived through the intervening 9 years and everything they contained. This song, released without any of the conventional promotional apparatus that number 1 singles typically require, goes to the top of the chart. It is the longest song to reach number 1 in the history of the Billboard Hot 100. The record exists because the audience for long-form narrative storytelling in popular music is larger than the industry has ever given it credit for. It exists because the fans who have loved All Too Well for a decade and who have known or suspected that there was more of it, that the song they loved was itself a reduction of something larger, were right, and they knew they were right and they were waiting. It exists because Taylor Swift understood something about her audience that the commercial structures of the music industry did not, that when you give people something true and complete, they will receive it without regard for its length, or its format, or its fitness for the channels through which music is conventionally distributed. It exists because some songs are simply that good. She stands at the end of 2021, having accomplished things that resist easy summarization. 2 Grammy-winning albums made during a pandemic that transformed her creative approach. 2 re-recordings that have begun the process of reclaiming her catalog. A 10-minute song at number 1. A critical reputation that has been, in the course of these 2 years, fundamentally and perhaps permanently elevated. The woods were good to her. The silence and the solitude and the creative freedom of a year without touring, without the machinery of pop celebrity, without the pressure of the public-facing life, all of it produced something she could not have produced any other way. The cabin in the imagination, the place she went when the world stopped, turned out to be where some of her best work was waiting. She emerges from it changed. Fuller somehow. More certain of what she is, and what she is capable of. The world is reopening around her, the venues and the stadiums slowly coming back to life, the possibility of gathering together in rooms and letting music move through shared air returning to the horizon. She is ready. Chapter 10, The Eternal Eras and the Life of a Showgirl, 2022 to 2025. There is a word that gets used too easily, too often, in the coverage of popular culture. The word is phenomenon. It is applied to albums and tours and moments of cultural convergence, with a casualness that has drained it of most of its meaning, applied to things that are merely successful, merely popular, merely large. The word deserves better. It deserves to be reserved for things that genuinely exceed the available frameworks for understanding them, things that require new language because the existing language is inadequate to describe what is actually happening. What Taylor Swift does between 2022 and 2026 is a phenomenon. In the original, unreduced sense of the word. Midnights arrives in October of 2022, and it arrives like a detonation. The album is announced, prepared for, anticipated, and still when it comes it exceeds the anticipation. She has made it with Jack Antonoff, her closest and most enduring production collaborator, and the sound they build together is something new in her catalog, late night and introspective, built on layers of synthesizer and atmospheric production that create the sensation of being inside someone's 3 a.m. thoughts, when the defenses are down and the questions that don't have comfortable answers rise to the surface and refuse to be dismissed. The subject matter is inward, in a way that even Folklore and Evermore, for all their literary ambition, were not quite. Those albums turned outward into fiction, into other people's stories, into the escape of imagination. Midnights turns inward, into self-examination, into the accounting of a life lived in extraordinary circumstances, into the complicated experience of being famous and human simultaneously, of carrying the weight of other people's projections while trying to maintain access to your own authentic self underneath them. It is in many ways the most personally revealing record she has made since Red, but with the perspective of someone who has lived through everything that came between Red and now, who has the distance and the craft to examine her own interior life with both honesty and art. The release strategy is, characteristically, meticulous and effective. The album drops at midnight, fitting its title, and within hours it is breaking records on every streaming platform that tracks such things. By the end of its first day, it has been streamed more times than any album in the history of Spotify. The entire top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100, in the week following its release, is occupied by Midnight's tracks. All 10 positions. Every song in the top 10 simultaneously, by the same artist. This has never happened before. In the entire history of the Billboard Hot 100, which has been tracking popular music since 1958, no artist has ever occupied all 10 of the top 10 positions simultaneously. The record exists now because Taylor Swift has broken a boundary that the chart's architects did not think needed to be enforced, because they did not imagine it was reachable. She reaches it without apparent effort. Or rather, with the enormous, invisible, decades-long effort that produces things that appear effortless. The Grammy for Album of the Year follows in February of 2024, and it is her 4th. No artist in the history of the Grammy Awards has won Album of the Year 4 times. She has now won it twice as many times as the previous record holders. She walks to the stage at the Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles, and the room rises, and she accepts the award with the composure of someone who has stood in this position before and who understands, each time, that the moment is not about the trophy, but about everything that produced it, every early morning in a studio, every rejected demo tape, every song written alone in a room, every decision made against advice, every time she chose the authentic thing over the safe thing and lived with the consequences. She uses the acceptance speech to announce something. The announcement is characteristic in its timing and its precision, the Grammy stage as platform, the largest possible audience as witness. She announces the release of a new album. The Tortured Poets Department. But first, before the new album, before the next chapter, there is the Eras Tour. It begins in March of 2023, and it is, from its first performances, something that has not existed before in the history of live music. The concept is deceptively simple. A concert that is also an archive, a 3-hour-plus journey through the complete catalog of Taylor Swift's recording career, organized not chronologically but by era, each album given its own section, its own distinct aesthetic and sonic identity, its own moment in the evening. The audience experiences not one Taylor Swift but many. The country teenager of the debut, the fairytale romantic of Fearless, the soul author of Speak Now, the emotional explorer of Red, the pop revolutionary of 1989, the dark phoenix of Reputation, the lover and the fighter of Lover, the woodland storyteller of folklore, and evermore, the insomniac philosopher of midnights. Each era has its own costumes, its own staging, its own production design. The transitions between them are theatrical events in themselves. The show is, at its fullest, a kind of autobiography in performance, a life's work rendered as spectacle, offered to audiences who have, in many cases, been present for the actual unfolding of that life's work, who remember where they were when Fearless came out or what they were going through when Red said exactly what they needed it to say. The production scale is staggering. The stage alone is an engineering achievement, a structure of platforms and catwalks and hydraulic lifts and LED surfaces that transforms each arena into a different kind of space, depending on which era is being performed. The band is exceptional. The dancers are exceptional. Every element of the show, from the smallest costume detail to the largest set piece, has been considered and reconsidered and refined with the same obsessive attention to craft that has characterized every significant decision of her career. And then there is the set list. 3.5 hours of music, night after night, across more than a year of touring. The physicality of this is almost impossible to overstate. To perform at that level, with that intensity, for that duration, for that many consecutive nights, it is an athletic achievement as much as an artistic one, requiring a discipline of body and mind that goes far beyond what most people understand when they think about what it means to be a performer at this scale. The surprise songs are a revelation within the revelation. Each show contains 2 acoustic performances, 1 guitar, 1 piano, of songs chosen from her catalog, different every night, announced to no one in advance. The fans who follow the tour from city to city, who attend multiple shows, who track every set list with the intensity of scholars, turn the surprise songs into their own parallel event. The anticipation, the recognition when the first chords arrive, the particular electricity of a live moment that will not be repeated. The economic impact of the era's tour is, depending on how it is measured, either the largest or among the largest in the history of live entertainment. The $2 billion figure is the one that circulates most widely, and it represents the gross revenue generated by the tour across its run. A number that exceeds the GDP of several small nations. A number that causes economists to write papers about the measurable impact on the local economies of the cities where she performs. Hotels fill. Restaurants report record nights. Local businesses report surges in revenue that they attribute, specifically and directly, to the arrival of Taylor Swift and her audience. She is at this moment not simply a popular musician. She is a macroeconomic event. The Tortured Poets Department arrives in April of 2024, and it arrives as a double album, a format that signals ambition and scope, a willingness to give the material the space it requires rather than constraining it to the conventional single album length. The record is the most emotionally raw of her mature work, a collection that deals with grief and disillusionment, and the specific pain of relationships that do not survive the weight of real life, that exist at a level of emotional exposure that feels at moments almost uncomfortable in its directness. She has been through something. The record does not specify exactly what, in the way that her earlier work sometimes did, naming names, placing events in identifiable contexts, but the feeling is unmistakable, the feeling of someone who has loved with her whole self and found that love insufficient to hold things together. The writing is some of the most technically accomplished of her career, operating with a precision and an economy that suggests a songwriter who has internalized everything she has ever learned about the craft and is now applying it without visible effort, the technique so deeply embedded that it no longer announces itself. The critical reception is divided in ways that are themselves interesting. Some reviewers find the emotional rawness overwhelming, too much, the artistic equivalent of oversharing. Others find in exactly that quality the record's greatest strength, the evidence of an artist who has decided past the age of 30 that she has nothing left to hide. Both responses are, in their way, acknowledgments of the same thing, that this is not a comfortable record. It is not designed to be. It is designed to be true. The announcement of her engagement to Travis Kelce comes in August of 2025, and it arrives in a cultural context that has been building for nearly 2 years. The relationship began in 2023, became public in the fall of that year when she appeared at Kansas City Chiefs games and the cameras found her in the stands, and produced a media convergence of a scale that surprised even people accustomed to the scale of Taylor Swift coverage. The intersection of the two largest entertainment ecosystems in American life, professional football and Taylor Swift, created something new, a moment of cultural overlap that drew audiences who had never previously occupied the same media space into a shared conversation. The engagement is announced with the privacy and the warmth that have characterized her management of this relationship from the beginning, a public acknowledgement of something that has been real and private, shared with the world in her own time and on her own terms. It is, like so many things in her life, both a personal moment and a public event, and she navigates the boundary between those two things with the fluency of someone who has been practicing that navigation for her entire adult life. The Life of a Showgirl arrives in October of 2025, and it is the most formally ambitious project she has undertaken. Not simply an album, though the music is extraordinary, but a combined album and film project that represents a genuine expansion of her artistic practice into a new medium. She has always understood that music exists within a visual context, has always been sophisticated about the relationship between sound and image, has made music videos that function as short films and concert productions that function as theatrical events. The Showgirl project takes this understanding to its logical conclusion, a work that is designed simultaneously as music and as cinema, that requires both to be fully experienced. The title is a reclamation of a particular kind. A showgirl is, in the cultural imagination, a figure who exists for the pleasure of an audience, decorative, performative, defined entirely by the spectacle she creates. Taylor Swift takes that figure and turns it inside out, examines the interiority of the person behind the performance, insists on the complexity and the artistry and the genuine creative intelligence that exists within and beneath the spectacle. The showgirl, in her conception, is not diminished by the show. She is enlarged by it, she contains it, controls it, authors it. The film component demonstrates a directorial sensibility that has been developing visibly since her earliest music videos, an eye for composition and color and the relationship between music and image that is, by this point, genuinely her own. She is not a musician making a film. She is an artist working across multiple forms, bringing the same standards and the same obsessive attention to craft to each of them. The Songwriters Hall of Fame induction, formalized in 2026, is the final institutional acknowledgement of a fact that has been evident since she was 14 years old and signing publishing deals at Sony ATV. She is inducted as the youngest female inductee in the organization's history, a record that, like the Grammy records before it, exists not as a statistical curiosity but as the formal recognition of genuine achievement. The Songwriters Hall of Fame exists to honor the people who have contributed most significantly to the art of popular songwriting. Taylor Swift belongs there. The Hall of Fame, by inducting her, is simply acknowledging something that the music itself has been saying for 20 years. And through all of this, through the record-breaking albums and the history-making tours and the legal battles and the re-recordings and the documentary and the film and the engagement and the inductions, there is the quiet, persistent, methodical work of Tush rights management. The company bears her initials, and its purpose is the protection of everything that bears her name. The trademark portfolio it maintains is extraordinary in its scope, more than 300 applications in the United States alone, more than 400 internationally, covering a range of assets that extends from the obvious to the granular. Her stage name, her album titles, specific phrases from her lyrics, the particular combinations of words that have become, through repetition and cultural embedding, associated with her in ways that have commercial value. Even the names of her cats, Meredith Grey, Olivia Benson, Benjamin Button, have been protected, because in the ecosystem of Taylor Swift's cultural presence, even the peripheral details have become commodities that other people might profit from. This is not paranoia. It is precision. It is the same quality of mind that led a 14-year-old to focus on songwriting, rather than simply performance, that led a 19-year-old to note the distinction between publishing rights and master recordings, that led a 28-year-old to negotiate ownership of her future masters before signing a new label deal. It is the understanding, cultivated over decades and through direct experience of what happens when you do not protect what you have built, that artistry without infrastructure is vulnerable, that the most beautiful and genuine creative work in the world can be diminished or stolen or profited from by others if the legal and commercial architecture surrounding it is not as carefully constructed as the art itself. Taylor Swift has always built both: the art and the architecture, the song and the trademark, the story and the structure that protects the story. She has done this since before she was old enough to vote, and she has never stopped doing it, and the result is a creative and commercial enterprise of unusual durability, a career that has survived and in many cases been strengthened by every challenge and controversy and industry disruption it has encountered. She is 36 years old as 2026 unfolds around her, and she has been doing this for more than 2 decades, and she is, by any available measure, at the height of her powers. The voice is richer than it has ever been, deepened by time and experience, carrying in it the accumulated weight of everything she has sung and everything she has lived. The writing is more assured, more economical, more capable of doing enormous things with small means. The understanding of performance, of spectacle, of the relationship between an artist and an audience has reached a level of sophistication that is almost impossible to teach, and that can only be acquired through the specific education of actually doing it thousands of times in rooms of every size and shape and atmosphere. She knows things now that she could not have known at 16 or 20 or 25. She knows what she is made of because she has been tested in ways that most people are not tested, and she has not broken. She knows the difference between her public self and her private self because she has spent 20 years navigating that difference with increasing clarity and decreasing anxiety. She knows that the work is what matters, the actual, specific, demanding work of writing a song that is true, of performing it in a way that reaches the person in the farthest seat, of building and maintaining a body of work that will outlast the news cycle and the social media discourse and the industry's perpetual reshuffling of its hierarchies and its values. She has been, from the very beginning, in the business of making things that last. The Christmas Tree Farm in Wyomissing understood this. The slow, patient growth of something that takes years to become what it is meant to be. The girl who grew up among those trees understood it too, even then, even before she had the language for it. The trees grow slowly, and they endure. She has always known that the best things do. There is a December morning in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, and a girl is born, and the world does not yet know her name. And there is a stage, somewhere, right now, where a woman stands in the lights and opens her mouth and sings something she wrote alone in a room. And thousands of people who have never met her feel in the most private part of themselves that she is singing directly to them. That she knows something about their lives that they have never told anyone. That the song is theirs. This is the magic. This has always been the magic. It is not a trick. It is not a strategy. It is not the result of brand management or trademark filings or carefully orchestrated media narratives, though all of those things have their place and their importance in the story. It is the result of a person who has spent her entire life paying attention to what it feels like to be alive, and who has found in language and melody and the ancient human art of the psalm a way to share what she has noticed with everyone who is willing to listen. The song goes on. And somewhere, in a room somewhere, she is already writing the next one.